Simultaneous Transmigration, unstoppable from the anime multiverse. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction, so don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 301 Seiya, Kill One First. Well, we're well aware that a one-on-one duel would be a long shot. And the Bob tournament finals are free for all, so what we're doing isn't against the rules, right? Kirito hadn't sparred with Seiya since their previous encounter in Sao. After 2 years of playing death games in Sao, Kirito had initially assumed his swordsmanship had improved considerably, narrowing the gap between them. But after just this encounter, Kirito realized that Seiya seemed even stronger. Bang, 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 another barrage of gunfire rang out. Seiya could only dodge left and right against Shino's sniper fire, each aimed squarely at his vital points. While Seiya dodged, Kirito seized this golden opportunity. He gripped his lightsaber tightly, seizing the opportunity Seiya had left to avoid Shino's sniper fire and unleashing a barrage of attacks. Despicable. Truly despicable. How could this light sword user and ice sniper team up to fight 2 against 1? What about the fairness of the Bob tournament? Watching Seiya being suppressed by the combined forces of Kirito and Shino, Suguha immediately transformed into a keyboard warrior, rapidly tapping away at the keyboard before her, editing a barrage of comments. In fact, Suguha wasn't the only one questioning the fairness of the Bob tournament in the comments appearing on the live stream. After all, compared to Kirito and Shino, Seiya, who had previously eliminated most of the GGO players with his prowess, was more popular than them. This Bob isn't PvP. Since it's a free-for-all, teaming up is naturally allowed. How can this be considered despicable? Only those who know how to leverage others' strengths and strategize can be the ultimate victor. The Golden Cub is powerful, but he's also too proud. His current situation of being outnumbered is probably his own choice. That's right, that's right. There were players who had proposed to cooperate with the Golden Young Lions before, right? He chose to refuse. And if the lightsaber user and the ice sniper don't join forces, then what's the point of watching this final competition? Of course, in addition to some people who think that such a competition is unfair, there are also quite a few who think that there is nothing wrong with the behavior of Kirito and Shino. After all, in the rules of a free-for-all competition, the weak huddling together for warmth and eliminating the tough and powerful enemies first is a kind of tactic. And most of them also want to see where the limits of the Golden Young Lions are. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that with the strength they have shown before, if it is just the lightsaber user or the ice sniper, there is no way that the two of them can be a match for Seiya. Rather than a final without suspense, what they want to see is naturally a fair fight. Twang, using his optical gauntlet, he grasped Kirito's downward slashing lightsaber. Sparks flew from his steel fist as he held it. Almost instantly, Shino, aiming her weapon from afar with Hecate, seized the perfect opportunity and pulled the trigger again. Unfortunately, Seiya, gripping Kirito's lightsaber with his gauntlet, was unable to dodge, but with his other hand, he used the lightsaber to split the bullet aimed at his head in two mid-air. With his lightsaber firmly grasped, Kirito was about to fire a close-range shot at Seiya with his secondary pistol, but Seiya anticipated his move and threw him, sword and body, forward in the next second. Seiya's avatar, SNS 404, though sized like a young boy, wasn't weak, quite the opposite. As an extremely rare avatar model, Seiya's avatar possesses superior attributes compared to most standard avatars. Kirito, violently thrown by Seiya, adjusted his stance mid-air with incredible balance. Just as he was about to land and launch a second attack at Seiya, a chain grappling line suddenly shot out from Seiya's gauntlet. The grappling line entangled Kirito's waist, and with the momentum of his backward flight, Seiya's petite body was also pulled towards him by the chain. While airborne, even the most formidable reflexes are impossible to dodge without a foothold. Shino, hiding 100 meters away, initially thought this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and quickly raised the muzzle of her Hecate, attempting to snipe Seiya from mid-air. However, a look of disappointment quickly crossed her face. Because through her scope, she could only see Kirito's back. As for Seiya's body, Because the grappling hook was aimed at Kirito, from her angle, Seiya's petite form was coincidentally completely obscured by Kirito's body. Kirito, with his astonishing observation skills, noticed that Shino hadn't sniped Seiya at such a good opportunity, and he immediately discovered the reason. Coincidence? No, knowing Seiya well, this was entirely the result of Seiya's calculations. Seiya, even during the battle, was constantly observing the situation, analyzing and calculating it. Shino's distance and shooting angle were likely already taken into account when he launched his attack. Was he using the grappling hook to use himself as a shield? If it were simply to evade a sniper attack, Seiya's abilities wouldn't have required such a lengthy effort. No. Shino, get out of there. Almost as soon as Kirito shouted, Seiya cut a grappling cord from his gloves and closed in on Kirito. He kicked him directly, using him as a fulcrum to advance several meters further. Shino didn't understand Kirito's cry at first, but when Seiya passed Kirito and reappeared in her sight, she finally understood his intentions as she saw the glove flashing in Seiya's hand. It's too late to react now. You're already within my range, and with a heavy sniper rifle on your back, there's no way you can dodge this. As Seiya finished his words, a thick white laser shot out from his palm, still in midair, and pierced Shino's body as she raised her Hecate. Don't forget, the optical glove is more than just a boxing glove, it's also a single-shot, long-range optical weapon. Chapter 302 ends, Bob Championship. As her body was pierced by white lasers, her HP plummeted to freezing point at a visible rate, and her body finally shattered like glass. Shino finally realized the full purpose of Seiya's actions. Using the grappling hook to entangle Kirito and pull him, using him as a shield, was only one of his objectives. Furthermore, he was also using Kirito's body to block Shino's vision. While the optical glove was powerful, it had a significant drawback. It required a certain amount of time to charge. Without Kirito's body to block her vision, the light generated by the charging optical glove would have been visible to her. In other words, even without Kirito's warning, having understood Seiya's intentions, she would have immediately evacuated her position. After all, besides the drawback of the optical glove requiring a charge, its effective range was far inferior to his Hecate II. This was why Seiya used the grappling hook to drag Kirito and advance forward. From Seiya's original position, the optical glove's laser weapon was no threat to him. Shino took off her NERvGear helmet and returned to reality, a wry smile on her face. That guy is really strong. Although she was defeated, she didn't feel the slightest bit of resentment this time. After all, compared to the first time, she didn't underestimate the enemy at all this time, and even teamed up with Kirito, but now she still lost. After another laser shot sent Shino away, the optical glove on Seiya's left hand also emitted a lot of electric sparks, obviously completely useless. Seiya was not too surprised by this. After all, he had used the optical glove to withstand many sniper shots from Death Gun before, and then faced Kirito's lightsaber. It was completely expected that the durability would be exhausted. I should have realized this sooner. On the surface, it may seem like you've been fighting me to the death, but from the very beginning, your target has always been Miss Shino, right? After all, if I were facing a 2-on-1 situation like this, I would definitely try to eliminate the sniper who could threaten me at any time. Looking at the eliminated Shino, Kirito shook his head in frustration. By the time he realized and warned Shino, it was obviously too late. After all, the durability of my gloves was almost depleted during the previous battle with Death Gun. Who knows how many more of Shino's Hecate bullets they can withstand. And if I lose my only long-range, high-damage weapon, even I would be in a difficult position against a team like you. Seiya only has so many weapons, a lightsaber, an optical glove, and a pistol. The pistol has a limited range and its lethality is also rubbish. Even if it hits Kirito and Shino, if it doesn't hit the vital parts, it will be difficult to kill them without emptying the magazine. And if the optical glove is destroyed first, Seiya will have to use a lightsaber to withstand Kirito's lightsaber close-range attack and Shino's sniper long-range attack at the same time, which is too much effort even for him. Kirito is a tough nut to crack, and it is not easy to kill him in a short time, so Seiya can only find ways to kill Shino, who is a greater threat but easier to deal with. After Seiya's set of operations, Shino was eliminated, and the barrage in the live broadcast room of the game exploded instantly. Kirito and Shino understood the intention of Seiya's previous operation. And many professional players in GGO naturally understood it as well. Previously, They had all assumed Seiya's prowess was limited to technical prowess, but now they suddenly realized that Seiya's calculations and tactical abilities were also truly impressive. Seiya hadn't previously demonstrated this talent simply because his previous opponents weren't qualified. In that seemingly brief encounter, Seiya considered the optical glove's flaws and characteristics as a weapon, his opponent's positioning and shooting angles, and other factors. Not only was he skilled, but he also possessed a sharp mind. Many GGO players consider this year's strongest gunner to be the most formidable of all time. While the competition wasn't yet over, Shino had been eliminated, there was still the lightsaber user Kirito. Most people believed Seiya had a near-successful victory. If the Ice Sniper and lightsaber user teamed up, they might still have a chance of victory, but in a one-on-one PvP match, most doubted Kirito could defeat Seiya. Abandoning the worn-out optical glove on his left hand, Seiya chose to clasp his lightsaber with both hands. Kirito, witnessing this, chuckled and did the same, standing opposite Seiya. It's a bit strange that the final duel for the best gunner in GGO's most prestigious Bob tournament, where the title is determined by swords, is decided. Whoever emerges victorious will probably be savaged by the GGO officials and the other players, right? Hearing Kirito's rather teasing words, Seiya raised an eyebrow and chuckled, I don't really care whether I get slammed or not. After all, I've already completed the task I was asked to do. I'm just worried that the GGO officials might withhold my Bob Champion's prize. Seiya had originally considered giving up the tournament, but now that they'd reached this point, he naturally decided to win. After all, he'd heard the Bob prize model seemed quite valuable, and the prize money was quite substantial. Kirito, damn it, you're talking like you're already a lock on the championship. Seiya, Kirito-chan, although I really want to be humble, but no matter how you look at it, I have a greater chance of winning, right? The moment Seiya dropped the bullet from his hand, Seiya and Kirito rushed towards each other almost at the same time, and the two lightsabers, one blue and one white, collided in the air, splashing a lot of sparks. In NERvGear, Tokyo, in Seiya's room, when Seiya took off the NERvGear helmet on his head, Sugua and Angie looked at him with a smile and said, Congratulations, Seiya brother, for winning the final Bob Championship. Mr. Kikuoka just called and said that Masakazu Shinkai and the others have been successfully arrested. The reward he promised you will be directly transferred to your account after the interrogation. Before Angie finished her words, Sugua on the side had already pushed Angie away impatiently and looked at Seiya with a smile on her face. Sugua, brother Seiya, regarding the beautiful girl with long flaxen hair who came to our house last time, do you have anything you need to explain to me? Chapter 303 Who said King Mei can't defeat the one who comes from the sky? The Bob tournament concluded, and the death gun incident came to a close with the arrests of the Shinkai brothers and Kanemoto Atsushi. Because the death gun incident was so egregious, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications kept the details of the incident private. The Shinkai brothers and Kanemoto Atsushi, despite their young age, faced life imprisonment due to the severity of their crimes. Seiya, having won the Bob Championship and received a reward from Kikuoka Jijiro, secured sufficient funds to reopen his family's kendo gym. Having finally achieved his goal, Seiya should have been delighted. However, to be honest, his life has been a struggle lately. Sugua-chan, is that fried egg a little burned? Seiya complained bitterly to Sugua, who was wearing an apron, as he gazed at the dark mass of food before him. Let's call it an omelet. Seiya, I'm so sorry, my cooking skills are only so good. If you're not satisfied, maybe Asuna-san can make you breakfast. Seeing Suguha's sweet smile, Seiya shuddered, and then, not caring whether the dark thing in front of him was an omelet or something else, he stuffed it all into his mouth. After watching Seiya obediently finish his dark breakfast, Suguha snorted coldly, finally pouting, clearing the table, and slinging her school bag to school. Seiya, it's all your fault, you philandering bastard. Sugua-chan's cooking has plummeted these past few days, and I've even stopped eating at home lately. It was clearly your fault, so why did you punish me by making me eat dark food with you? I miss Sugua-chan's old cooking so much. Seiya's face was filled with frustration as he listened to Angie, dressed in pajamas, complain to Seiya nearby. That's right. Ever since she learned about Seiya and Asuna's relationship in Sao, Sugua has been completely jealous these past few days. In the past, Sugua even took cooking classes to take care of Seiya, because she'd heard that to win a man, you first have to win his stomach. Therefore, Suguha's dishes used to be quite delicious. But lately, perhaps because of her jealousy and her deliberate punishment of Seiya, Suguha's dishes aren't just delicious anymore, they're pure awful. Seiya had previously expressed his gratitude for Suguha's poor performance, and that now that they had money, they could splurge on takeout. However, Suguha dismissed this suggestion outright. Not only has Suguha been constantly cooking awful dishes lately, but she's also been making sure Seiya finishes them every time, making life extremely difficult for Seiya. If it were in the past, Seiya would have been able to refuse Suguha's dark cooking, but recently, because he was in the wrong, facing the powerful Suguha, Seiya really had no way to deal with her. Stop nagging, it's not like I wanted to make things like this. And the matter of Death Gun is obviously over, why are you still staying at my house? Logically speaking, Suguha and Angie would move into Seiya's house entirely because of the influence of the Death Gun incident, but now that Death Gun has collapsed, Suguha and Angie are still staying at Seiya's house, which makes him quite puzzled. You little rascal, we've been through life and death together. Now that it's over, you want to kick me out? That's way too heartless. Also, I've already given up the apartment I rented before, and it's impossible for me to find a replacement in a short period of time. Can you bear to see your sister wandering the streets? Anyway, you still have a spare room in your house, so I can pay the rent. If you don't want the rent and want your sister to repay you in other ways, that's not impossible. Anki's long legs stretched out, and Zai, who had returned because he forgot to bring his sportswear, saw this scene, and a big H sign suddenly appeared on his forehead. Suguha, it's not what you think. It's that idiot Angie-san who's playing a trick on me. Before Seiya could finish his words, an enraged Suguha rushed over to him, slamming a knife into his head and shouting, "Seiya, you idiot, pervert. After asking her brother, Kazuto Kirito, about Asuna, Suguha's anger towards Seiya eased. The 2 years in Sao might have seemed like a game to the outside world, but for the players trapped within, they were their true lives. Suguha had heard from her brother, Kazuto, that Asuna had helped Seiya immensely in Sao, and that their relationship was the result of Asuna's pursuit. She had never expressed her feelings to Seiya, and since Seiya was so outstanding, it was only natural that other women would pursue him. Asuna-san is so beautiful, and she's so brave enough to express her feelings to Seiya-san. If it were me, I'd probably choose her too. Suguha's recent gloom stems more from her own frustrations. Seiya-san always treated her like a younger sister, and Suguha knows it. If she had expressed her feelings to Seiya-san earlier, perhaps things would have been different now. Suguha has figured it out these past few days. While Seiya-san and Asuna-san are a couple in Sao, her careful observations over the past few days have revealed that the clumsy Seiya-san seems to maintain a clear distinction between reality and the MMO world. In other words, while Seiya-san and Asuna-san may be a couple, or even husband and wife, in real life, Seiya-san probably only sees Asuna-san as a close friend. In other words, Suguha hasn't lost the battle for his girlfriend yet. In the past, relying on the advantage of being a childhood sweetheart, and the fact that Seiya had always rejected many other women since childhood, Suguha had always been in an environment without a sense of crisis. But now the situation is different. Now that Miss Asuna has appeared as a powerful rival, Suguha can no longer be content with the status quo as before. This time, she must take the initiative to attack. Who said that childhood sweethearts can't defeat those who fall from the sky? Suguha just doesn't believe this. Miss Asuna has only known Seiya for 2 years. No matter in terms of feelings or experience, how can she compare with Suguha? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304 Conan World, Heir to the Consortium. In the world of Conan, Teton Elementary School. Early in the morning, a group of children were rioting in the newly dismissed elementary school classroom. Seiya, who possessed the soul of an adult but the appearance of a 7-year-old boy, glanced around, sighed deeply, and fell asleep on his desk again. Seiya, you must be one of those so-called geniuses, right? Do you feel a lot of pressure? Yawning widely, Seiya was about to lie down on the desk for a nap when a few children suddenly approached him, and one of them, a little girl, brought the conversation to him. Seiya shouldn't have any such thing as pressure. I see him lazily sleeping every day, but he always gets the best grades in the class, whether it's sports or studying. That's right, even though I'm not trying hard, I always get praised by Mr. Kobayashi. How great is that? Like me, I always get beaten up after every test. My mom even said that if I get first place, she'll treat me to eel rice, but sadly, I've never gotten first place. Seiya knew the little kids who had gathered in front of him, and they were among the few people in his class he interacted with. The first lolly to speak to Seiya was Ayumi, followed by Mitsuhiko and Enta. Anyone who had seen Conan knew that these three were the so-called junior detective team, a prominent supporting character in the series. When he first arrived in this world, Seiya possessed the wisdom and soul of an adult, but the appearance of a powerless 7-year-old, and he was utterly panicked. After all, the scientific world may seem mediocre in combat power, but the mortality rate is incredibly high. On a good note, one person dies a day, on a bad note, several. Wherever the Shinigami student goes, he dies. If his fate isn't strong enough, he might be caught up in the scourge of the underworld. Before sharing the power of Seiya from another world, Seiya lived a precarious existence in this world. To prolong his existence and strengthen his fate, Seiya resorted to insinuating himself into the main characters. After all, a close look at the entire Conan series reveals that while the Shinigami student's presence can lead to death, making him a walking messenger of hell, he never betrays his own people. Over 1,000 episodes of murders, passers-by die one after another, but those around him, no matter how they act, remain undead. So, Seiya realized that to avoid being affected by the Shinigami student's death laws, he decided to cling to his thighs. What? You're a mature adult, hanging out with a bunch of brats. Don't you feel ashamed? Shame on you. What's the value of dignity in the face of life? And he's not the only one playing cute. The Shinigami students and Habara AI are also playing it up. Huh? You're talking about genius or not? I don't understand a word you're saying. Seiya was filled with questions as he listened to the three brats' monologue. Soon, a black-haired kid in a blue blazer and large black-framed glasses, and a young girl with chestnut-length hair and a rather mature demeanor, came over and said, "They're talking about the news they saw last night. Syndra Corporation has released a groundbreaking game called Cocoon, utilizing the latest virtual reality technology. This VR technology was reportedly developed by Hiroki, a gifted young man, 2 years ago. Hiroki reportedly committed suicide by jumping off a building due to excessive stress. So, after 2 years of research by Syndra Corporation, this virtual reality game finally came to fruition. Amy and the others think that Hiroki is amazing because he was only 10 years old and could develop artificial intelligence, but they don't understand why he was so depressed and jumped off the building." After hearing Conan and Habara AI's explanation, Seiya's face showed an expression of "I see." First of all, compared to a super genius like Hiroki who was able to develop artificial intelligence at the age of 10, someone like me who can only get first place in elementary school exams is not a genius at all. At most, I am relatively smart. As for the pressure of geniuses, you are still too young, and it is difficult for me to explain it to you clearly. How can Seiya explain the issue of pressure to a group of carefree kids? Even if he said it, would these little brats understand? But Seiya, aren't you only 7 years old like us? Yeah, so I don't feel the pressure you mentioned at all now. Is Seiya a so-called genius? Not really. After all, as an adult, it would be strange if he couldn't get full marks every time on elementary school tests. If we really talk about IQ, the Death God elementary school student and the black-bellied lolly in front of him are obviously much smarter than him. After all, one is a high school detective who knows a little bit about everything. His father took him to Hawaii to study every time. The other is a genius scientist who developed the banned drug APTX 4869 that can rejuvenate people at a young age. Seiya now looks like a 7-year-old, but he has an adult mind. In the eyes of ordinary people, he may be considered a genius boy, but compared with the two guys in front of him, his IQ is really not enough. If Conan and Habara AI hadn't deliberately concealed their shortcomings, he probably wouldn't even be able to get the first place in the first grade of Teton Elementary School. Well, Class B of the first grade of Teton Elementary School is so terrifying. Speaking of Cocoon, the virtual reality game developed by Syndra Corporation, your family should be invited. Seiya. I heard that the guests invited to Syndra Corporation's press conference are all Japanese celebrities, and the Suzuki Group, one of the country's leading conglomerates, should be among the invited guests this time, right, that's right. Another reason why Seiya felt that there was nothing wrong with his coming to this world was because his name in this world was Suzuki Seiya. The youngest brother of the Suzuki family, the love-struck Suzuki Sanako, and also the heir to the Suzuki group. Because Seiya's two elder sisters, Suzuki Ayako and Suzuki Sanako, are both daughters, he is very much loved in the Suzuki group as the heir to the family. Suzuki Ayako is engaged at the age of 24, and Suzuki Sanako is also a high school student. Seiya is the only male in the family and the youngest brother, so you can imagine his status. Before Kuro Shinichi became Conan, because Sanako was Ailin's best friend, she also knew Seiya, and she had heard about how their family doted on the only heir. The Suzuki Group is also one of the investors who provided financial support for Sindora's development of the cocoon, so it should be a foregone conclusion that they will be invited. Chapter 305 The Strongest Elementary School Student in History. Sindora Corporation? A game called Cocoon developed with the latest virtual reality technology? Seiya had definitely watched the Conan anime, but with over 1,000 episodes, he'd seen it all, from elementary school to college, while Conan was still in first grade, so he gave up midway. Because of the sheer volume and the length of time that had passed, Seiya honestly couldn't remember most of the cases, aside from a few interesting ones from the original storyline. Hearing the familiar term Sindora Corporation and virtual reality game Cocoon, Seiya was reminded of the highly acclaimed and popular Conan movie, The Phantom of Baker Street. See you all tomorrow. If our family does receive an invitation to the Sindora Corporation press conference, I'll ask them to take you all along. After making this promise, Seiya finally shook off the clinging little brats and got into the car his family had sent to pick him up. Unlike Sanako, who possessed no airs of a consortium princess, Seiya was routinely transported to and from school by a special car. While he had objected to this ostentatious and extravagant behavior with his family, his objections were, unfortunately, futile. This would have been fine before the power sharing, as Seiya felt he possessed the mental abilities of an adult, yet with the physique of a 7-year-old, even a random criminal could easily defeat him. However, since sharing the power of the other world Seiya now felt that his family's car and bodyguards were unnecessary. With his current strength, it's undeniable that he was the strongest elementary school student in history. Even the most dangerous black organization in this world would be forced to turn to selling alcohol if confronted by him, let alone ordinary criminals. Seiya, are you back? Your school principal called yesterday to praise you. I heard you took first place in every sport at the school festival. Mom is so proud of you. Your sisters, Ayako and Sanako, are just like your father, mediocre in both academics and sports. Only you inherited Mom's excellent genes. Seiya had just returned to the Suzuki household when a distinguished lady in the living room, wearing a professional suit, short chestnut hair, and a beauty mark just below her eye, lifted him up and kissed him on the cheek with a smile. This elegant lady was none other than the Suzuki family's mistress, Seiya's current stepmother, Suzuki Tomoko. Mother, please respect yourself. I've told you many times, I'm grown up now, and you can't keep treating me like a child. Suzuki Tomoko was a woman of exceptional strength and confidence. Not only was she the true head of the household, she was also known for her stern demeanor in all situations. However, when facing her only son, her aloof demeanor often vanished completely. Okay, you've grown up. Putting aside the fact that you're only 7 years old, you're still my child. Your Sanako is already in high school, yet she's still so childish. You, on the other hand, are so mature and steady at an age when you should be acting like a spoiled brat to your parents. I guess you inherited my excellent genes. Suzuki Tomoko bit Seiya's cheek a few more times before finally letting him go. Suzuki Shiro, who was listening to her words, was speechless. Could it be that the child in their family inherits all the good genes from his wife, and all the bad ones from him? In terms of appearance, Shiro Suzuki admits that Seiya is indeed more like his wife, but in terms of IQ, he thinks his son should still be more like him. After all, although his wife is smart and capable, a career woman, she is still far inferior to him in terms of IQ and business ability. Of course, Shiro Suzuki can only think about this idea in his mind now, because he is a henpecked husband. If he dares to contradict his wife when she is happy, he will probably sleep on the floor tonight. Since you got such good grades at the school festival, if you want any reward, just tell me. As long as I can do it, I'll grant it. After all, achievement leads to reward, that's the motto of our Suzuki family. Seiya admitted he'd never heard of such a motto, but since anything was allowed, then I want to go to and from school on my own. I don't need a car or bodyguards. Seiya used to lack the skills, and he was afraid of death himself, but now that he was the strongest elementary school student ever, sometimes he wanted to act on his own. While his current strength wouldn't be difficult for him to evade the family's bodyguards, his sudden disappearance would surely cause chaos at home. Upon hearing Seiya's request, Suzuki Tomoko, who had been smiling brightly, suddenly felt her expression drop. If it were anything else, Mom would agree to it, but this is the only thing Mom can't compromise on. Seiya, you have to understand this, you're the heir to the Suzuki family, and with our wealth, there might be a lot of criminals out there targeting you, but Sanako-san is also a daughter of a consortium, right? How can she go to school alone like an ordinary person? Seeing Suzuki Tomoko's drooping face, Seiya made a final effort. Sanako-san is already a high school student, and you're only 7 years old. Besides, does your Sanako-san usually look like a daughter of a consortium? Then I can be like an ordinary child too. Okay, enough about this. This is an invitation to the Syndra Company press conference, and it comes with 3 badges for their Cocoon experience. I heard that Cocoon is a new virtual reality game. I'll take you and Sanako along this time. Consider it a reward, because he is the only male in the family and the youngest. Suzuki Tomoko, who used to dote on Seiya, would not normally refuse Seiya's request. But it was precisely because of her doting on Seiya that Suzuki Tomoko disagreed with Seiya's request to go to and from school alone. Seiya has been obedient and sensible since he was a child, and has shown amazing talents not only in study but also in sports. Suzuki Tomoko has always regarded him as her pride and is not willing to let him take even the slightest risk. Chapter 306, The Mad Demon Suzuki Tomoko. Because they come from a consortium, the Suzuki family is a prominent family, so Suzuki Tomoko has always been very strict with her children. Unfortunately, of her 2 daughters, the eldest daughter Suzuki Ayako, although successful in her studies, is cowardly and is not suitable to be the heir to the Suzuki group. Needless to say, the second daughter Suzuki Sanako is even more so, because under her high-pressure education, Suzuki Ayako's personality has become somewhat timid. So when educating Suzuki Sanako, Suzuki Tomoko is more of a free-range child. The end result of this is that Suzuki Sanako is more like a wild child than the daughter of the consortium. She is not good at literature or martial arts, and she is even quite rebellious and often dares to contradict herself. In short, as the eldest daughter, Suzuki Ayako has achieved some results under Suzuki Tomoko's education, but the results are not ideal. Tomoko Suzuki saw her second daughter, Suzuki Sanako, as a complete failure in trumpet practice. She had even given up on her youngest daughter, simply wanting her to be happy. When Seiya, the only son of the Suzuki family, was born, Tomoko was undoubtedly thrilled and delighted. However, reflecting on her own parenting experience, Tomoko worried that she had ruined her youngest son. However, this uneasiness persisted until Seiya could speak and walk, when Suzuki Tomoko's initial worry quickly gave way to pride. Seiya, from a very young age, displayed exceptional intelligence and talent. Unlike other children, he was not mischievous, he was extremely sensible and eager to learn. While other children were considered remarkable for being able to write their own names by the age of 3, Seiya, with his astonishing learning ability, had already mastered most characters and even elementary-level math. Upon realizing her son might be a genius, Suzuki Tomoko was overjoyed and determined to train him to be a worthy heir to the empire. But just a year later, Suzuki was stunned. Her son had already mastered all her business skills and concepts in just 1 year, and even expressed a desire to learn other skills. His son was a genius and eager to learn, which was a good thing. Furthermore, the Suzuki group was well off, so they could hire the best tutors. Over the years, Seiya's tutors changed repeatedly, and Suzuki Tomoko herself wasn't sure how much her son knew. It was the Suzukis who decided that Seiya would attend Teton Elementary School for first grade. While they knew their son was a genius, perhaps even an extraordinary one, they didn't want him to be too prominent. Their family was already one of the nation's leading conglomerates. If even the heir was this talented, it would inevitably lead to jealousy and even unnecessary trouble. But mother, I've actually practiced martial arts. If I ran into a bad guy, you'd be kidnapped. Even if you have a black belt in karate, what good would that do? You're only 7 years old. Do you think a 7-year-old with a few fancy moves can defeat adults? This isn't a movie. You've always been obedient and sensible. You can't be a rebellious girl like your sister Sanako. Hearing Suzuki Tomoko's words, Seiya wanted to shatter the nearby stone pillar with one punch to prove his strength. But then he realized he was only 7 years old. Doing so would be too shocking. His learning ability could be explained as genius. But a 7-year-old shattering a stone pillar that could be hugged by 2 people with a single punch was pure freakishness. Ultimately, Seiya was forced to compromise and wait to find another solution. The launch of the virtual reality gaming device Cocoon, developed by Sintra Corporation, was taking place at a 5-star hotel this weekend. At Seiya and Sanako's request, Ran Mori was able to bring the detective boys and Kagoro to the event. It's exhausting. Every time we attend these events, my mom takes us to meet all sorts of so-called high-class celebrities. Those people are so self-righteous and hypocritical. I really don't like dealing with them. Suzuki Tomoko and Sanako were dressed in gorgeous gowns for the event. The guests invited to the event were mostly high-class figures from Japan. As the representative of the Suzuki group, Suzuki inevitably had to socialize. As Tomoko's son and daughter, Seiya and Sanako were naturally accompanied by Tomoko. Mom, you're such a fool. You could just bring Seiya, the heir to the family, to deal with those people. Why drag me along? After strolling around, exhausted, Sanako complained to Ren in front of her, while also complaining to her mother beside her. If you were half as good as your brother, I wouldn't bother with you. Your sister Ayako is already engaged to the 3rd son of the Trezoll family. But if you keep up this temper, Sanako, I'm worried you'll never get married. It was true that Tomoko took her son to social events purely to show off, but she brought Sanako along to look for a future marriage partner. The Suzuki group was a prestigious family, so even their daughter wouldn't marry into a humble family. Sanako was not bad looking, but her carefree personality wouldn't necessarily endear her to those wealthy families. Of course, Sanako was still young, but the attendees at the press conference were all upper-class people, so Tomoko was thinking ahead and looking for a partner for her daughter. After understanding her mother's intention, Sanako's face turned ugly at a speed that was almost visible to the naked eye. Seeing that the situation was about to get bad, Seiya hurriedly said, I think what mother said this time is wrong. I really like Sanako's current personality. Although she is carefree, she has a very sincere heart. Her sincerity is more precious than anything else. If one day I also want to marry a wife, then rather than that arrogant young lady, I would rather choose a sincere, straightforward and kind girl like Sanako as my wife. After hearing Seiya's flattery, Sanako's expression on the side instantly turned from anger to joy, and she directly hugged Seiya into her arms and said, Our Seiya really deserves to be my favorite and proud. Chapter 307 Seiya just beat up the naughty kid. Seeing Sanako, unbelievably unladylike, pick up Seiya and embrace him, Suzuki Tomoko sighed deeply. However, after seeing the interaction between the siblings and the joy on their faces, Tomoko finally refrained from speaking. Sanako, your relationship is still just as good as it always was. Seeing Seiya, only 7 years old, so eager to defend his sister in public, Ran was happy for her best friend. Of course, my brother, Seiya, is the best brother in the world, and he's the only one in our family who can easily manipulate my mother. Your little brat may seem quite clever, but he's still a far cry from my brother. Ran and Conan, who lay beside her, both looked embarrassed by Sanako's brother showing behavior. As Sanako's best friend, Ran smiled awkwardly but didn't argue with her. On the other hand, Hubara on the side never missed any opportunity to make fun of the Shinigami elementary school student. She directly nudged Conan's waist with her elbow, and then teased softly, It seems that you were outdone by that little brat Seiya. Even your sister Xiaolin didn't speak for you. Hearing Hubara's teasing, Conan also showed a wry smile on his face and said, Although Sanako is a brat sometimes, what he said this time is true. If I hadn't had my body shrunk, I was indeed far less smart and clever than that kid Seiya when I was 7 years old. You haven't known him for long. This kid is much smarter and more talented than you think. If you really treat him as a brat, you will suffer. Xiaolin, Sanako and Shinichi are all childhood sweethearts who grew up together, so it is not an exaggeration for Kudo Shinichi to say that he watched Seiya grow up. As a renowned high school detective, Kudo Shinichi's observational skills are naturally superior to those of ordinary people. Therefore, he had long since noticed that Seiya was deliberately concealing his abilities. Even after encountering the Black Organization and being fed a shrinking poison, APTX 4869, Conan briefly suspected that Seiya was a victim like him. Of course, this suspicion was only briefly dispelled. The reason is simple: unlike Edogal Conan and Hebara AI, Suzuki Seiya didn't just appear out of nowhere, but actually grew up in the Suzuki family. Ultimately, Conan could only conclude that there are truly gifted geniuses in this world, individuals who possess not only superior intelligence and learning abilities, but also a far greater maturity than their peers. Upon hearing Conan's assessment of Seiya, Hebara was initially surprised. But soon, when she heard Seiya's argument with some wealthy second-generation kids at a conference, she nodded in affirmation. "You're right. Whether it's the way he speaks or how he handles things, he doesn't act like a child. He's even better than some adults." Seiya's argument with the wealthy second-generation kids at the conference stemmed from the fact that Aomi and the others, who had been able to attend the conference thanks to Seiya and Sanako, were arguing with him. Since the children attending the conference were all wealthy and privileged, having grown up in privileged families, they were naturally arrogant. So, when they saw Aomi and the others, who were dressed modestly, they immediately started mocking them. Kagoro Mori, standing nearby as an adult, was about to reprimand the children, but instead was mocked. He was nicknamed Sleeping Kagoro because his wife ran away while he was asleep. Meanwhile, Ran, looking quite serious, claimed her mother had run away while her father was in the restroom. Faced with the arrogant brats before her, unable to rebuke them or hit them, Sanako unleashed her most powerful noble phantasm. No, it was her strongest brother, Seiya. Oh my! Isn't this Seiya Suzuki, the young master of the Suzuki group? Are you going to stoop so low and defend these poor brats? They're all my friends. Please hold back, or I'll get mad, and when I get mad, I'll hit them. Huh? Hit them? A brat like you? Then hit us and show us. Before the young man, Moriboshi Hideki, dressed in a bright red suit and clutching a soccer ball, could finish this sentence, he was punched in the face and sent flying backwards. The wealthy second generations, completely unprepared for Seiya's sudden attack, saw their leader getting beaten and, in a fit of rage, rushed towards him. However, the final result was clear. Though these wealthy second generations were roughly 11 or 12 years old and more than a head taller than Seiya, they were easily crushed in a 4-on-1 situation. "You little brat, are you looking for death? I'm going to beat you to pulp." Moriboshi Hideki, who had been sent flying by Seiya's punch, immediately picked himself up and dropped the ball to the ground. Then, with a sprint, he kicked it straight into Seiya's face. As the ball hurtled toward Seiya, Ran, standing nearby, attempted to intervene, but Seiya hadn't anticipated her. Facing the oncoming ball, Seiya advanced instead, clenching his fist and gathering his strength with a powerful punch. Bang! With a thud, the ball, originally headed for Seiya's face, was shattered by his punch. Conan, Ran, and the others were stunned upon witnessing this scene. Punching a high-speed soccer ball with bare hands required more than just strength, it also required incredible skill. After all, the ball would normally bounce when struck, and punching it through was something Conan and the others hadn't even considered. "Ran-san, if it were you, could you do it like this?" Punching through a soccer ball with one punch, Conan knew Ran's karate prowess best. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call her a humanoid Tyrannosaurus. That's why he asked Ran, who also looked at him with astonishment. "With pure strength, I might be able to shatter the ball, but punching through it requires a certain level of skill. I never expected Seiya to be so formidable." Hearing Ran's words, Conan fell silent. It seemed his wife was a freak, too. Despite the absurdity, Conan, with his exceptionally receptive nature, readily accepted Seiya's incredible prowess. After all, Ran's predecessor at the karate club, Kyogoku Makoto, could kick continuously and directly break a stone pillar 1 or 2 meters thick. Luban Ii's partner, Goayama Wai, could cut through an armored vehicle with his Zantetsu sword. Compared to them, Seiya punching through a football doesn't seem so unacceptable. Chapter 308, This is a 7-year-old kid. I have shown mercy to you just now. If you still want to continue to attack me or insult my friends, I will not hold back next time. He pulled a punctured football directly from his arm. The rich second generation who had been so arrogant just now were obviously scared when they met Seiya's gaze. But even though they were cowardly, they still had to say some polite words. So even though they didn't dare to continue the fight, Hideki Moriboshi and the others still glared at Seiya, saying in a somewhat timid tone, "You bastard, do you know what will happen if you provoke us? Don't think you're great just because you're the heir to the Suzuki Group. I'm the grandson of the deputy superintendent." Sorry for the offense. Before the young Hideki Moriboshi could finish his words, an old man with a rather dignified appearance walked out of the crowd and shouted at them, "Hideki, what are you guys doing here?" Because the fight between Seiya and the others was so loud, Suzuki Tomoko, who was originally socializing with others at the venue, heard her beloved son fighting with others and hurried over. After learning the whole story, Tomoko glared at Sanako, who was standing nearby. She handed Seiya to Sanako in the hope that her daughter could take care of her brother, but as soon as she left, this cheating thing caused her brother to get into such a big trouble. She had just met several rich second generations opposite. In addition to the grandson of the deputy police director, there were also the sons of politicians, the sons of Jebel bankers, and the sons of the most famous doctors in the country. Although the Suzuki Consortium has a big family and a big business, it is hard to handle offending so many powerful families at the same time. Seiya, what the hell is going on? Seeing that his precious son was not injured, and those who were beaten were basically a few rich second-generation people across from him, Tomoko breathed a sigh of relief and asked, a little unhappy at the same time. After all, her precious son has been obedient and sensible since he was a child, and has always been her pride. Not to mention hitting people unreasonably, he has always been extremely polite to the servants at home. They were rude to my friends. Ran, Conan, and the others were all at the banquet with our Suzuki family. To verbally insult them is nothing short of a disgrace to our family. I warned them, but they refused to change their ways. They even told me to stay out of their own business, so I just took action. Conan and the others were invited by our family. If I humiliate them, how can I be considered heir to the Suzuki family? Besides, I could have asked my sister to teach them a lesson, but we were all just children, and I felt a child's quarrel shouldn't involve the family. Who knew 4 of them would pick on me? Not only did they not win, but they even resorted to brutal force when I held back. After hearing Seiya's clear and logical account of the incident, the dignified old man looked at his grandson and asked, "Is it really as he said?" Moriboshi Hideki, already feeling a little guilty at his grandfather's stern questioning, lowered his head and dared not speak. But even so, you shouldn't hurt anyone. Although he knew he was in the wrong, the pot-bellied banker still argued with his fat son Zhang Xiaohuang. "Uncle, those guys playing football without paying attention to anyone at the banquet is already causing public outrage. And what's more, in that fight just now, it was 4 of them beating me up, and they're all 11 or 12 years old, while I'm only 7. If I hadn't learned some martial arts, I'd have been the one getting beaten, right? All of you uncles and aunts here are probably considered prominent figures in society, and have made significant contributions to society. But with your children acting so recklessly, aren't you worried about them ruining your family's reputation? Don't forget, today is the Sintra Company press conference, so there are quite a few members of the media present. If this mess gets reported, I'm sure it would have some impact on your political achievements or your business. So, I think what just happened was just an accident, a playful brawl between us kids. What do you think, uncles and aunts, a 7-year-old? Everyone was stunned when they saw Seiya standing in the center of the room, speaking eloquently. It's one thing for this kid to be outmatched, beating 4 kids significantly older than him to pulp. The problem is his rhetoric and debating prowess, for a 7-year-old. Seeing the many reporters present genuinely drawn to the scene by the commotion, the previously serious Metropolitan Police Department official, after a deep look at Seiya, smiled appreciatively. You're truly formidable young minds. I also believe this is merely a misunderstanding. Children's playful quarrels are inevitable. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, the matter is naturally over. I also hope everyone present will give me some respect and refrain from spreading nonsense. The most prominent of the wealthy second-generation parents had relented, leaving the others with little to say, only to accept the loss. Any ordinary character would undoubtedly be no match for them. Even with reporters present, they were confident the story wouldn't get out. The crucial point was that the other party was the Suzuki Group, a major domestic corporation. If they tried to make a big deal out of this, they would be the only ones to suffer. It wasn't worth getting so wounded over such a trivial matter. They were in the wrong in the first place, so the only option now was to keep things quiet. I knew that you uncles, as elites in society, would know how to distinguish right from wrong. Although I attacked out of anger from my friends, I was wrong to be the first to do so. So, I apologize to you brothers for my actions just now. Seiya had no intention of making enemies for the Suzuki group. In the eyes of those parents, while their children had suffered a loss, it was ultimately a minor matter. Seeing Seiya's bow and apology, their expressions brightened considerably. Seeing Seiya, who was only 7 years old but had managed to handle everything and solve the problem single-handedly, Moriboshi Hideki's grandfather glanced at Suzuki Tomoko and said, "Mrs. Suzuki, when I heard others praise your son before, I thought it was a bit exaggerated. But now it seems that your child is even more outstanding than I imagined. It proves that your ability to educate children is truly outstanding." Upon hearing this, Suzuki Tomoko's face suddenly lit up with pride. She had originally thought that Seiya's trouble would be a disgrace to her, but she hadn't expected her beloved son to actually make her proud. At only 7 years old, he already knew how to use his power to pressure others, and how to weigh the pros and cons, using the opponent's strength against their own. Suzuki Tomoko asked, "Besides her son, who else could it be?" Chapter 309, Death God Elementary School student is present, how can there be no deaths? Mrs. Suzuki, although we don't have a suitable match for your second daughter, we do have a little daughter who's 7 years old this year, just like your son, Mrs. Suzuki. We met last time at Miss Suzuki's engagement party, right? I'm the wife of the chairman of the Sahi group. Your in-laws, the chairman of the Trizol group, are cousins of ours. We actually have a little daughter too, and while she's 3 years older than young Master Seiya, the age difference isn't that big. How about a child marriage with our daughter, Mrs. Suzuki? Your son is incredibly talented, and I have a niece. The attendees at this press conference were almost all from the country's upper class, and as the social elite, they're discerning. I was naturally quite discerning. Although Suzuki Tomoko had previously flaunted her daughter, and others had joined in the flattery, it was ultimately more of a business pitch. After all, they all came from aristocratic families, and their children had received an elite education from childhood, so their manners and behavior were more refined than those of ordinary people. This wasn't uncommon. But after witnessing the entire incident, everyone present naturally had a different perspective. Previously, they had all thought Suzuki Tomoko's boastful behavior was a bit exaggerated, but now they all felt that her previous assessment of her son was simply too modest and conservative. A 7-year-old child could silence a group of upper-class adults in such a situation. Who would believe that? Other children at 7 were still playing in the mud, but the Suzuki heir's intelligence and skill seemed to rival those of the seasoned veterans. This wasn't just a child, he was a monster. With such skills and intelligence at just 7 years old, coupled with the fact that the Suzuki group was already a powerful domestic conglomerate, it was easy to imagine how powerful Seiya's family would become in 10 or 20 years' time, when he truly inherited the Suzuki group. Although they had heard of the Suzuki family's young master's talent before, this was the first time they had witnessed it firsthand. What happened here today would sooner or later spread among the aristocratic circles, and it was foreseeable that a potential talent like Seiya would become extremely sought after. Marriages between wealthy and powerful families were inherently about maintaining their interests. Since the heir to the Suzuki group was so exceptional, it was crucial to strike early. Otherwise, by the time their talents fully unfolded, they might not even have the chance to get their hands on any more. For this reason, Suzuki Tomoko quickly became the center of attention. Those considering marriage alliances with their family, and those seeking her advice on parenting, enthusiastically approached her. "Sanako, Aunt Tomoko seems to be having a hard time right now. Can't you go back and help out?" Ran, seeing Suzuki Tomoko surrounded by a crowd, asked Sanako. Seiya believed that the situation ultimately unfolded in part because of them. After all, if Seiya hadn't stood up for them, things wouldn't have turned out this way. "Don't worry, Seiya. My mom is the best at handling situations like this. And don't let her look at her embarrassed face, she's probably incredibly proud. She's probably thinking that Seiya inherited her excellent genes, and that it's all thanks to her guidance that Seiya is so outstanding. A mother knows a daughter best." In fact, while Tomoko appears embarrassed, she's secretly delighted. They wanted to arrange a marriage for Seiya, and although Tomoko initially refused, that didn't stop her from listening to others praise her son. Honestly, a jebel like the Sahi group is no less powerful and influential than the Suzuki group. But her son Seiya is only 7 years old, getting engaged is definitely too early. Besides, with her son being so impressive, who knows if he'll find someone better in the future? In short, Since her son was so impressive and not her own nymphomaniac daughter, she wasn't worried about a lack of market, so she wasn't in a rush at all. This is such a headache. I hope you won't make promises to anyone so easily. Hearing Seiya's worried words, Sanako clenched her fists and began to poke at his temples. Are you scared now? You were so prominent just now. Not only did you leave me alone, but you also got me scolded. If I had just beaten up those naughty kids, the situation would have been different. As a child myself, it would have been more appropriate for me to do it. But when I think about the possibility that these children will inherit the family business and status, I can't help but feel sad for the future of this country. A politician's son is still a politician, a jebel's son is still a jebel, and the child of an unscrupulous doctor is still a doctor. It's the epitome of modern society. Hearing Seiya's lament, everyone was stunned, except for Ayumi and the other two, who didn't understand it all. Conan looked at the stunned Aihabara beside him and whispered, "Now you see, I told you all along you can't treat Seiya like a normal kid." Compared to a genius like Hiroki Sawada, who developed artificial intelligence at the age of 10, Seiya's intelligence is far more than just his brains. Despite some turmoil, the Cocoon press conference ultimately went smoothly. As a game built using virtual reality technology, Cocoon features 5 dungeon worlds, including Old World London, Western cowboys, and Jurassic dinosaurs. Naturally, with the presence of the Shinigami students, casualties were inevitable. So, while Thomas Sindorak, president of the Shinigami Company, was speaking on stage, a scream interrupted his speech. Indeed, even with the Shinigami students present, murder still occurred. Kashimura, the person in charge of the development of Cocoon under Sindora, was murdered, and when he was killed, he used his bloody hands to leave a death message of JTR on the keyboard. Because Conan's father, Kudo Yusaku, who was one of the game's plot editors, also appeared at the press conference, Conan and Seiya were also able to enter the crime scene. The murdered Kashimura was also an old friend of Kudo Yusaku, and when he saw the death message left by Kashimura, he thought that this was a death message left for him by his friend who knew he was also present. Although he guessed the answer quickly, looking at his son who was thinking hard beside him, Kudo Yusaku did not directly reveal the answer, but let his son make the inference. Chapter 310 Is the murderer Jack the Ripper? Yusaku Kudo had already deciphered the meaning of the death message, but, wanting to test his son, he held back on answering directly. It shouldn't be JTR, it should be RTJ. Just as he grasped the message's meaning, a childish voice suddenly appeared beside them. Kudo Yusaku was initially surprised by the childish voice. Though his son had grown smaller, his deductive abilities had surprisingly improved. But when he peered in from behind, he was surprised to discover that the second person to have deduced the answer wasn't his son, Kudo Shinichi, but another child who looked about Conan's age. Seiya, huh? Uncle's curious, how did you figure that out? Ran, Sanako, and Shinichi had been childhood sweethearts, so while Kudo Yusaku didn't know much about Seiya, he did know him. Although he'd heard from his son Shinichi before that the Suzuki family's youngest son was intelligent, he hadn't anticipated his extraordinary abilities. It's simple. When a person is near death, their body's available strength naturally decreases as they draw their last breath. The shape and area of the blood on the keyboard can roughly determine the force with which their fingers pressed. Kashimura's pressure on the keyboard, while near death, should have been decreasing as his body deteriorated, right? So, according to this logic, the order of the death messages on the keyboard should be RTJ. Upon hearing Seiya's explanation, Kudo Yusaku was stunned. Blood on the fingertips would indeed leave different marks depending on the pressure applied, but such marks reveal a lot. Even a renowned mystery novelist like him didn't understand this, yet a 7-year-old child knew so much. He was able to discern Kashimura's death message at a glance because he had participated in the development of Cocoon, and it was originally intended for him. And the fact that this child could deduce the answer so quickly was entirely due to his incredible talent. If it's RTJ, not JTR, then that means the death message left by Mr. Kashimura is the abbreviation of Jack the Ripper in London 100 years ago. After figuring out the order of the letters, this time the three of them said what the letters meant in unison. That's right, I think Kashimura's death message should be for me. Because among the 5 game copies developed for Cocoon, there is the game world of Old London, and I also participated in the development of the plot of this copy world, so Kashimura left such a death message. Hearing what Kudo Yusaku said, Conan on the side also said excitedly, in this case, In order to decipher the true meaning of this death message, it is not necessary to go through Cocoon to enter 19th century London. To be honest, although Seiya didn't remember the exact plot details of the movie The Phantom of Baker Street, he vaguely remembered that Kashimira's killer was Thomas Sindora, the president of Sindora Corporation. The main reason for his actions was related to the suicide of the genius Hiroki Sawada 2 years prior. Hiroki was adopted by Sindora, and by chance, through a DNA matching system and Sindora's family heirloom dagger, he learned that Thomas Sindora was actually a descendant of Jack the Ripper, the infamous 19th century serial killer. After learning this, Sindora, now a business tycoon, naturally couldn't let such news spread. Hiroki knew that once his AI was complete, Sindora would inevitably kill him, knowing this secret. So, he used his own AI, Noah's Ark, to transmit this DNA matching information to his biological father. Hiroki's biological father is the murdered Mr. Kashimira. His initial suspicion of Hiroki's death stemmed from his involvement with the company, leading him to infiltrate the company to investigate. However, just as he obtained evidence and met with Thomas Sindora, hoping he would disclose the facts and apologize to Hiroki, he was murdered by the enraged Sindora. Jack the Ripper was Sindora's ancestor. While his crimes would inflict eternal infamy on his descendants, the law cannot punish his descendants. Although Sindora imprisoned Hiroki, he did not harm him directly, and Hiroki ultimately committed suicide by jumping from a building. Kashimira understood that such charges alone would be difficult to bring the powerful Sindora to justice, so he used a DNA matching system to force a public apology from him. However, he overlooked the fact that Sindora was a descendant of Jack the Ripper, possessing the same sinful and ruthless blood. A public apology? That's like destroying his own business empire. If outsiders knew he was a descendant of Jack the Ripper, how could he continue to make it in the business world? Destroying someone's financial resources is like killing their parents. Kashimira overestimated his own abilities and underestimated Sindora's ruthlessness, which led to his downfall. But what left Seiya speechless was the final death message Kashimira left behind. You're already capable of typing a 3-letter abbreviation, so why not just type Thomas Sindora's initials instead of Jack the Ripper's? Isn't that just like taking off your pants to fart? It's a waste of time. Despite being unaware of Kashimira's intentions, the death message he left behind prompted Yusaku Kudo and Conan to work together to uncover the true killer. Conan prepared to enter the game's 19th century London through the Cocoon, while Yusaku Kudo deduced Kashimira's murderer in reality. The Cocoon game launch event had a total of 50 spots available for trial play, and Kudo Yusaku, as a participant in the game's development, also received a trial badge. The rest of the detective boys, like in the original story, traded rare game cards with the wealthy second-generation players in attendance for Cocoon trial badges. The only difference was that in the original story, Sanako's trial badge was supposed to go to Ran. This time, however, it was Suzuki Tomoko who gave Ran her badge, claiming she was too old to play. Sanako, who had originally avoided entering Cocoon, saw her best friend Ran and the children entering the game, and naturally, she chose not to miss out. When Seiya, returning to the launch event from the crime scene, saw Sanako already seated in Cocoon, he was stunned. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311, Seiya, why is there a sense of Sword Art Online? Initially, Seiya had little interest in the so-called virtual reality game. After all, for others, the Cocoon, a virtual experience where one can control all 5 senses and experience real-life activities, was certainly quite novel. But for Seiya, this virtual reality game was completely uninspired. Remember, Seiyas can share abilities and memories, and in the Sword Art Online world, Sword Art Online Seiya had spent 2 full years in the virtual reality game world. Seiya had initially been uninterested in using the Cocoon to search for the murderer Jack the Ripper in 19th century London, and he even considered giving the experience badge to someone else. After all, he'd already made enough of a splash, and the remaining opportunity to show off was left to the Shinigami students. But what Seiya didn't expect was that Sanako, who was supposed to stay out of the Cocoon, actually joined in the fun. According to the original plot, Hiroki's consciousness, reliant on the artificial intelligence Noah's Ark, ultimately gave Conan and the others the clues they needed to survive. But plots are plots, and now is the present. The original Sanako hasn't entered the cocoon world yet, so who can guarantee anything unexpected will happen? So after a moment's hesitation, Seiya finally followed Conan and, with the help of the staff, entered the cocoon device. There was no other choice. If it were anyone else, Seiya could have simply stood by and let Conan handle the situation. But Suzuki Sanako was his stepsister, and she had been incredibly kind to him since childhood. Even at the slightest risk, Seiya had to ensure her absolute safety. When the 50 participants entered cocoon and it officially started, the 48 children, including Ren and Sanako, 2 high school girls, were gathered in an open area. Then, to everyone's surprise, the artificial intelligence Noah's Ark, claiming to represent Hiroki's consciousness, appeared and immediately seized control of the game. I am Noah's Ark, and I'd like to play a game with you. Cocoon has 5 scenes, and you can choose any one of them. If you fail the game, the cocoon you're in will enter a dormant state. If all 50 players fail to pass the game, I will use the cocoon to destroy all of your brain tissue. In other words, this contest hinges on the rebirth of this nation. I hope you'll be prepared. Upon hearing Noah's Ark's words, many parents present became anxious and rushed to the stage to try to protect their children. The idea of a life or death game was ridiculous. The children participating in this contest were generally only around 10 years old. The only 2 adults were 2 high school girls. How could they possibly gamble their children's lives on such a slim chance of success? However, just as the parents reached the stage containing the cocoon and attempted to forcibly open it, a powerful electrical current instantly repelled them all. You have no right to refuse this game. If you use violence again, I will immediately destroy your children's brain tissue. After hearing the warning from Noah's Ark, the parents present immediately stopped making any rash moves because they were afraid of the consequences. What do you mean by deciding the rebirth of this country? What exactly is your purpose? If you want money or something else, I can satisfy you as long as you are willing to release my 2 children. Suzuki Tomoko was one of the parents who had just rushed onto the stage. After being repelled by the electric current, she looked at the cocoon containing Seiya and Sanako with great concern, and negotiated with the so-called Noah's Ark. For me, an artificial intelligence, wealth is completely useless. Looking at your current state, I believe that the children of corrupt politicians will only become corrupt politicians. The children of doctors who are obsessed with making money will only become such doctors. If we want to make this country a better place, we can only sever this connection once and for all. Upon hearing Noah's Ark's response, everyone present was furious and shouted, "Stop it! You have no right to toy with another person's life, just like you adults have no right to toy with Hiroki's life. I'm simply doing the same thing as you humans." Wait a minute. I don't know about other people's children, but my child is not like you describe. My Seiya has always been polite, no matter who he is. Even though my daughter is a little clueless, she doesn't have the bad habits of a spoiled young lady. Everyone present now understood the AI Noah's Ark's purpose. However, Suzuki Tomoko felt her child was completely innocent. It wasn't the Suzuki group that was toying with Hiroki's life, and his child, far from having the bad habits of a rich young lady, was actually quite down to earth. Noah's Ark wanted to punish those children with bad behavior, but what did that have to do with her son and daughter? Everyone knew that her children, Seiya and Sanako, were both well-behaved children. Now that this game has begun, there's no stopping them. All that awaits them is either passing the test or ultimately dying. Admittedly, there are some children with good character among these children, but perhaps going through this test will also make them better. With these final words, Noah's Ark ceased communicating with the outside world. The children gathered during the game were terrified upon hearing the conversation between Noah's Ark and the adults. Some of the more timid ones even burst into tears. Ren and Sanako, the only 2 older people present, tried to comfort the children. However, the 10-year-olds already understood the meaning of death, and having always been children in a hotbed, they had never experienced anything like this. Tisk, tisk, tisk. I didn't expect to experience the visuals of the sword world in this world. But compared to the sword world SAO, this teammate configuration is obviously a bit poor. If it weren't for the shared power of Seiya from other worlds, this test would be truly fatal. Cocoon is intended for all ages, and the game scenes are far from easy for children. However, Seiya, who understood Hiroki's true intentions, didn't find Noah's Ark's decision surprising. Chapter 312 Clearance Conditions. Find and defeat Jack the Ripper. Is all you can do here is wail and sob? Didn't you hear what that Noah's Ark AI said? We don't have to die here. As long as someone successfully completes the game, we'll all be safe. You all have been raised in elite families, right? You've been raised in a wealthy family, enjoying the best resources, and now all you can do is cry? Or are you, without the support of your powerful parents, destined to become nothing? I bet your parents are watching you, your worthless selves, from the outside. Whether you pass this test and make them proud, or sit here complaining and waiting to die, it's your choice. The many crying children gradually subsided at Seiya's sharp shout in his words. Even if you keep crying, your parents might come here to help you. If you want to survive, you have to save yourself. And your crying will only bring shame to your parents in the eyes of the adults outside. Right, there are 50 of us now. If just one person manages to complete the game alive, the rest will be rescued. Thinking about it that way, the chances of success are pretty good, right? Honestly, Seiya was completely at a loss for words when it came to comforting the child. So, after a round of chicken soup, he ignored the fuss and headed straight for the game portal to Old London. There were 5 game scenes, each corresponding to a stone gate. Conan had already arrived at the portal to Old London thanks to Kashimira's death message. Naturally, Conan's choice prompted the rest of the detective boys, including Ran, to follow suit. Seiya and Sanako-san, come over here. As Seiya followed Sanako to the stone gate to Old London, a dramatic scene unfolded before his eyes. The children, who had been hesitant and unsure of which to choose, followed Seiya after seeing him choose the Old London game scene. The reason for this was, of course, quite simple. While the people currently trapped here are mostly 10 years old, having grown up in a privileged environment and influenced by their parents, they are far more astute than their peers. Seiya's previously demonstrated abilities are undoubtedly the most outstanding and superior of all the children. In other words, since the prerequisite for survival is to complete the game, following someone with exceptional skills naturally increases the likelihood of success. Furthermore, Seiya's group, besides his already impressive performance, also includes 2 older sisters, Ren and Sanako. No matter how you look at it, their chances of passing the game are higher than any other group, right? There are 5 game scenarios, each with a maximum of 12 players. And you don't need to do that. Regardless of which scenario you complete, everyone will be rescued. Choosing different game scenarios to tackle will actually increase your chances of success. If 50 people were to enter Old London to solve a case, even Jack the Ripper would be numbed by the sheer volume of murder, right? To prevent this, Noah's Ark had to reappear and impose this rule. Honestly, 50 players simultaneously selecting the same game scene was something even an AI couldn't have anticipated. With these additional conditions, the remaining 4 teenagers, besides Seiya and the others, were Moriboshi Hideki, Takazawa Shinaya, Armori Akira, and Kakyoka Seiichiro. Why are you guys the only ones left? If you cause trouble or get in our way again, I won't show any mercy. This is a game world, after all. Once we enter the scene, I'll kill you right away, so you don't get in the way. Moriboshi Hideki and the others were, of course, the same naughty kids who had clashed with Seiya at the banquet. In the original story, these naughty kids did indeed enter the same world as Conan and the others, and as they worked together to solve cases, they were gradually influenced by their actions. However, Seiya wasn't a pushover, and he didn't have the time to slowly teach these naughty kids good behavior. To prevent them from causing trouble during the investigation, Seiya planned to kill them right away once they entered the game scene. Kid, no, it's Boss Seiya. Don't misunderstand me. After what we've experienced before, we now know how powerful you are. This time when we enter Old London, we will definitely follow your lead and will not cause any trouble for you. Seeing that Seiya's expression didn't seem at all joking, Moriboshi Hideki and the others instantly flinched. In reality, the 4 of them were able to stay because they relied on their status and age advantage to intimidate the others into leaving. Although they harbored resentment towards Seiya due to the previous incident, it was undeniable that, like the other children, they recognized his exceptional abilities, which was why they were now prepared to cling to him tightly. Furthermore, their elders had previously warned them, while they were away, not to oppose Seiya again and to cultivate a positive relationship with him whenever possible. The Suzuki group was a vast and powerful entity, and its heir was such a formidable figure. The benefits of befriending him far outweighed the risks of offending him. Looking at the children who were looking at him with fawning expressions, Seiya's face shifted to a hint of suspicion. His gaze lingered for a long moment on Moriboshi Hideki's face, until he saw a hint of guilt in him. If Seiya remembered correctly, Moriboshi Hideki had been replaced by Hiroki's consciousness after entering the game, so Seiya was now curious whether the Moriboshi Hideki before him was actually Hiroki or himself. If it were Hideki Moriboshi, he'd have killed the mischievous child. After all, it was just a game, and for the safety of the other children, even his grandfather, the deputy commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Department, had to consider the greater good. But if it were Hiroki, would killing the child after entering the game scene anger Noah's Ark and increase the difficulty of the game? After a moment's hesitation, Seiya finally gave up on such a suicidal move. After all, he couldn't kill him with the electrical current device of Cocoon alone. But Sanako, Conan, and the others were different. If Noah's Ark got angry and killed Sanako and the others, it would be completely unworthy for Seiya. After passing through the stone gate before them, the 12 people soon arrived in 19th century London. They also received the conditions for completing the game, to find and defeat the murderer Jack the Ripper, and survive. Chapter 313. The game is about to turn just as it begins. The game setting of Old London is based on the story of Jack the Ripper, the dreaded killer of 19th century Europe. To enrich the game's content, characters from the novels of Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty have been added to the scene. Late at night in 19th century London, with the sound of an alarm bell, a patrolman discovered the body of a woman who had been attacked in a dark alley. Based on the killer's modus operandi and the victim's gruesome condition, the patrolman immediately concluded that this was the work of Jack the Ripper. As Seiya and his companions entered the game scene, a nimble figure flashed through the alleyway. Upon seeing the figure, Conan instinctively bent down, activated his high-tech sneakers, and kicked a broken kettle nearby, attempting to use a powerful shot to prevent the attacker's escape. However, the kettle flew less than 2 meters away, and Conan immediately clutched his foot and screamed. To compensate for his reduced size, Conan has access to numerous gadgets developed by Professor Agasa. However, while Cocoon, as a virtual reality game, allows players to experience their 5 senses within the game world, Conan's seemingly tamper-proof scientific gadgets seem ineffective here. Seeing Conan's dwindling power, and the recently murdered Jack the Ripper about to vanish from their sight, Seiya leaps from the group, dashing off at a speed unbelievable for his size. Although Jack the Ripper makes a final appearance in the Baker Street Phantom film, his identity remains a mystery. Catching him from the outset would have saved many complications. Conan's tactical gadgets are useless in this game world, but Seiya's various combat techniques and exceptional 5 senses are brought to bear. Despite lacking his extraordinary physical abilities, Seiya reacts immediately and gives chase, using his nimble and petite body to maneuver through surrounding buildings at an incredible speed. Meanwhile, outside at the press conference, everyone watching Seiya relentlessly pursue Jack the Ripper on a projection screen was stunned. Many in attendance had witnessed Seiya's earlier clash with Moriboshi Hideki and the other wealthy second generations. At just 7 years old, he had beaten 4 children, 4 or 5 years his senior, to the ground. Initially, everyone assumed he'd learned some martial arts, as he'd claimed. But now, watching Seiya leap like a top-notch gymnast, using his momentum to close the gap between him and Jack the Ripper, everyone felt as if they were watching a movie. Mrs. Suzuki, may I ask, which master in China is your young master's martial arts instructor? Seiya had previously demonstrated a quick-wittedness and intelligence that belied even a 7-year-old. Many assumed he'd inherited his parents' talents and would become a brilliant business genius. But now, as they looked at the large screen before them, they were stunned to realize that they had somewhat underestimated the heir to the Suzuki group. Not only was he quick-witted and gifted, but his physical prowess was also truly extraordinary. As Seiya, projected on the screen, narrowed the gap between him and the London killer, Jack the Ripper, and as others praised her son, Suzuki Tomoko's earlier worries quickly vanished. According to one of the developers, Mr. Yusaku Kudo, the prerequisite for clearing the old London scenario was to find and arrest Jack the Ripper. Seiya and his friends had barely entered the game scene when they encountered Jack the Ripper's murders. And their beloved son was even more remarkable than she had imagined. How could she not be delighted to see him clear the game after just one encounter? Those attending the Sindara Corporation press conference were both wealthy and powerful, and those who received the Cocoon Experience badges had family members among the nation's most elite. If her beloved son, Seiya, could complete the game in public and rescue the other children, the benefits to the entire Suzuki group would be undeniable. Their only son had saved the children of these elite figures. After all, They owed him a huge favor, right? Just as Suzuki Tomoko was secretly delighted, yet outwardly humbly asserted that her son wasn't a genius, simply working harder than the average person, something unexpected happened. On the large projection screen, Seiya, who had been mere meters away from Jack the Ripper, dodged several daggers thrown by Jack, landing on a stone bridge when it suddenly collapsed. Seiya, stepping on the falling rocks, managed to avoid falling into the rubble. However, this sudden change caused him to lose sight of Jack, who had been so close. The sudden turn of events not only made Tomoko Suzuki, who had been secretly delighted, worried about her son, but also caused the entire Cocoon press conference to erupt in a frenzy. They had just learned from one of the game's developers, Yusaku Kudo, that the original old London game scene did not include a bridge collapse. This meant that the only possible explanation for this sudden incident was that the artificial intelligence NERvGear had tampered with the game's plot, even increasing the difficulty. And just then, Dr. Agasa, using his computer skills, finally managed to connect with Conan in the game. Just as he was about to reveal Jack the Ripper's true identity, NERvGear forcibly cut off communication. Damn it, that damned AI is so despicable. To prevent us from cheating, it directly cut off our contact with those children. And to prevent the game from being too easy, it used its privileges to tamper with the plot and even increase the difficulty. Maori Kagoro watched Jack the Ripper disappear into the darkness on the screen, his face furious, as he slammed the table in front of him. Trust those children. All we can do now is find Kashimira's murderer as quickly as possible. If I'm not mistaken, the reason NERvGear trapped those children in the game must be related to Kashimira's death. Kudo Yusaku patted Maori Kagoro's shoulder and offered solace. He had great confidence in his son, Kudo Shinichi. Besides his son, the child named Suzuki Seiya was definitely no simple character either. If it were them, completing the game and rescuing the children shouldn't be a problem. Chapter 314 Blood Pressure from Sister? Seiya, how's it going? Did you catch Jack the Ripper? After the stone bridge collapsed, Conan and the others finally arrived from behind. The three idiots, especially the Mika, looked at Seiya with excitement and asked, "What a shame. I was almost catching up with him, but the stone bridge suddenly collapsed." Seiya spoke, glancing at Hideki Moriboshi from the corner of his eye. He was now almost certain that the arrogant rich second generation had been replaced by Hiroki. The sudden collapse of the stone bridge was likely Hiroki's doing. Hiroki trapped these children of the upper class in a cocoon, not to destroy the country's future, but to test them, allowing these children, who had been living in a greenhouse, to overcome difficulties through their own strength. Although Hiroki had previously known of Seiya's remarkable abilities through the memories of the young Moriboshi, the action and talent he had just displayed far exceeded his expectations. If Seiya had captured Jack the Ripper so easily, what would the training be for these children? Outside, they're protected by their powerful parents, but in the cocoon game scenario, they're directly led by a powerful figure like Seiya. This defeats the purpose of training them. Furthermore, the process of collecting clues and ultimately finding the killer Jack the Ripper is Hiroki's way of revealing the secret that Thomas Syndera is Jack the Ripper's descendant. If Seiya had captured Jack the Ripper right from the start, omitting all the intervening steps, how would he have uncovered Syndera's scandal? For these reasons, Hiroki intervened just as Seiya was about to capture Jack the Ripper, breaking the stone bridge and thwarting Seiya's pursuit. What a shame. He's a psychopathic killer who terrorized all of Europe in the 19th century. You, a kid barely taller than him, dared to leave us and chase him down alone? If you do that again, I'll be rude to you. The members of the Junior Detective League, along with the wealthy second generation Seiya had previously defeated, were still marveling at his skill. The next second, an angry figure suddenly approached from behind and unceremoniously slapped Seiya on the head. "Sister, what are you doing? In the game scene we're in, if your body sustains a certain level of damage, you'll be considered a failure and eliminated. Besides, he's not the real Jack the Ripper, just a bunch of programming and data for the game scene. If he kills me, I won't actually die. It's just a game." Before Seiya could finish his words, Sanako punched him in the head again. Because it was a game, Seiya didn't suffer a major bump from Sanako's powerful punch to the head, but the pain was palpable, thanks to his callus that perfectly resonated with all five senses. HMPH, not even in a game. Do you want me, as a big sister, to watch my brother die right in front of me? And this isn't a discussion, this is an order from a big sister, and as a little brother, I have to obey. But isn't Sanako always going against Mother and Ayako? Seiya muttered to himself before Sanako, crouching down beside him, raised her lip and looked at him. Seiya, what were you saying? I didn't quite hear you, Seiya. No, I was just impulsive. I won't do that next time. The young detectives and the wealthy second generation standing nearby were all surprised to see Seiya easily subdued by Sanako. Especially those wealthy second generations. They had previously assumed that an only son as talented as Seiya was the ultimate bully. Furthermore, as heirs themselves, even without Seiya's talent, they still held a high position within the family. On a good note, they might listen to their parents, but if they lost their temper, their parents would simply let them do what they wanted. But Seiya, both capable and the designated heir, was so easily subdued by his sister, completely lacking the confidence and dominance he displayed with outsiders. Has their relationship always been this good? Looking at Seiya and Sanako, Haibara couldn't help but think of her sister, a touch of sadness and envy crossing her face. Hearing Haibara's question and seeing the expression on her face, Conan realized that Haibara, no, Miyano Shiho, was also thinking of her sister, Miyano Akemi. Although Haibara appears to be very strong, she is actually quite dependent on her sister who was killed by the Black Organization. The brother-sister combination of Sanako and Seiya is, to some extent, quite similar to Miyano Shiho and Miyano Akemi. Miyano Shiho is codenamed Cherry in the Black Organization. She is an 18-year-old genius scientist, and Seiya is also a genius. And they both care about their sisters very much, although Miyano Akemi and Suzuki Sanako have very different personalities. But just by looking at Suzuki Sanako's tone and expression just now, Haibara can see that her concern for Seiya is the same as her sister Miyano Akemi cares about herself. Don't underestimate Seiya's abilities, maturity, and assertive nature. Even before I became a child, I often found him helpless. But the less intelligent Sanako has always had him in check, something that even Ran and I used to find strange. Seiya may be only 7 years old, but if you were to play tricks, 10 Sonicus wouldn't be his match. Yet, when it comes to Seiya, who's incredibly mature in front of others, he acts like a child when it comes to Sanako. After hearing Conan's words, Haibara simply looked at him and shook his head. You're the ones who don't understand. The seemingly powerful and exceptional Seiya's helpless and submissive nature towards his sister isn't because she's stronger or more exceptional. It's because he cherishes that bond. Even I, always hailed as a genius, am no match for a 7-year-old in this regard. And the reason it seems strange is that you, the great detective, and your sister, Ran, are both only children, so you can't experience the bond between siblings. Conan, who originally wanted to comfort Haibara when he saw her look dejected, was choked by her and said with a dead face, yes, I, an only child, don't know anything. This is my first time writing a Conan fanfiction. Damn, it feels so difficult to write. I always feel like I'm going off topic while writing. Chapter 315 The Reasoning of Queen of Reasoning Sanako? Seiya failed to catch up with Jack the Ripper, so what should we do next? Seiya was still chasing Jack the Ripper, and in just 1 hour, he had already murdered 2 women again. Even if we rush to Jack the Ripper's crime scene again now, it probably won't help. Even if he's still there, with the skills he's shown before, there's no way we can catch him. Since this game is set in 19th century London, that person should be here too, right? The others were still half understood Conan's riddle, but Ran, whose boyfriend is a detective, now had an expression of sudden enlightenment and said, I get it, it's Sherlock Holmes, right? Conan, you're so smart. Sherlock Holmes, is that something powerful? Looking at the puzzled Mikasa, Seiya couldn't help but sigh and said, Sherlock Holmes, a famous detective active in Conan Doyle's novels in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He has a calm mind, sharp observation skills, and outstanding reasoning ability. He is good at solving problems through observation, deductive reasoning, and legal knowledge. Conan was not at all surprised that Seiya was quite knowledgeable despite being a 7-year-old boy. Instead, he continued to talk to himself, with the skills that Jack the Ripper has shown before, it will be extremely difficult for us to arrest him in this aimless situation. So I think the way to pass this game scene is probably that we hope to keep collecting evidence and solving the mystery, and eventually find the identity of Jack the Ripper, and wait for him to take the bait, so that there is a possibility of arresting him. But before that, we need to have a certain understanding of Jack the Ripper's intelligence, so Sherlock Holmes should be able to help us. Naturally, Xiaolin and the other members of the Junior Detective League had no objection to Conan's suggestion. However, the arrogant rich second generations like Moriboshi Hideki seemed to be annoyed that Conan, a mere brat, was now bossing everyone around. So, they approached Seiya and whispered, "Boss Seiya, are you just going to watch this cocky brat boss us around like this? Yeah, he's just a brat. When did he become our leader?" While the brat had been paced by Seiya before, that didn't mean they were equally convinced by the others. Seiya was fine, though he was younger than them. He was the future heir to the Suzuki group, possessing both strength and brains, a true giant. But what of this brat called Conan? A mere poor brat, who had only been able to attend this press conference thanks to the Suzuki group's influence, was now relying on his own cleverness to try to boss them around. Wasn't that just blatantly insolent? So, besides what he suggested, do you have any other suggestions? But at least for the current situation, I think asking Sherlock Holmes for help is the best option. Seeing the heckling, Seiya knew these rich second-generation lads were about to start another suicidal display. Whether Moriboshi Hideki, Hiroki, was orchestrating the group to increase the difficulty of the game, or whether these rich second-generation lads were acting on their own initiative, Seiya couldn't tell. Upon hearing that Seiya agreed with Conan's plan and showed no displeasure at being directed by him, Moriboshi and the others cursed inwardly but ultimately followed suit. Sherlock Holmes's address was 221 Baker Street, Flat B as the group, originally halfway along their route, past a clock tower in central London. Moriboshi Hideki suddenly exclaimed, "Look at that clock. It's running backwards." Moriboshi's exclamation caused the others to look up in surprise. As everyone looked up at the clock, the overlapping hands had moved back several notches from the 50 mark. If I'm not mistaken, the 50 mark represents the 50 players who have entered the cocoon. The fact that it's moving back now means that someone in another game scene has been eliminated. The Death God pupil only had to glance at the large clock to deduce its purpose, and the others, seeing that nearly 10 players had already been eliminated shortly after the game began, couldn't help but become nervous. Compared to the others who were nervous, Seiya couldn't help but secretly roll his eyes at Hideki Moriboshi, who also looked surprised. The genius boy really loved to act. If he had just seen correctly, Hideki Moriboshi had cried out in surprise before the clock went backwards, right? So this meant that the other party knew that the clock would go backwards and what it meant, and the reason he cried out in surprise was just to attract the attention of others. Seiya was also sure that Conan was not the only one who noticed Hideki Moriboshi's unusual behavior. As they were heading to 221 Baker Street to find Sherlock Holmes, the patrol car on the road sounded the alarm again because Jack the Ripper had started committing crimes again. Seiya glanced at Hideki Moriboshi beside him. Just when he was thinking about whether to skip the search for Sherlock Holmes and go after Jack the Ripper again, a homeless man playing the accordion and singing suddenly appeared in front of them. "Be careful of Jack the Ripper, he's waiting for you on the night road. If you don't want to die, you have to be covered in blood." The homeless man looked at them with a meaningful look as he passed by them. "I understand. Let's catch him quickly. This man must be Jack the Ripper." Everyone who originally felt that the homeless man gave people a weird feeling, now all showed a look of vigilance when they heard Sanako's exclamation. Conan looked at Sanako behind him with a surprised look and said, "Sister Sanako, why do you think that the homeless man just now was Jack the Ripper?" To be honest, although the homeless man just now was a little strange, judging from his figure alone, he didn't look like the Jack the Ripper they had encountered before. Of course, Conan didn't dare to be too careless about Sanako's judgment. After all, although Sanako was not smart, she had a brother who was extraordinary. Maybe the judgment just now was what Seiya wanted to express through Sanako's mouth? This person gives me a very strange feeling. Moreover, Jack the Ripper had just committed a crime nearby, and he suddenly appeared in this area. So I infer that he must have deliberately disguised himself in this way in order to confuse our sight and escape from the scene. But Sister Sanako, if Jack the Ripper deliberately disguised himself as a homeless man to confuse us, then he shouldn't have done such a conspicuous act just now. After all, if he didn't sing, we wouldn't have noticed him, right? Hearing Conan's question, Sanako was suddenly unable to refute. Then, feeling greatly embarrassed, she still said stubbornly, "My reasoning, Queen Sanako's reasoning is definitely correct. Seiya, you should explain it to them." Chapter 316, The Increasing Difficulty of the Game. Seeing that Conan refuted her reasoning but Sanako was still stubborn and even put herself forward as a shield, Seiya sighed deeply and said, "It's unlikely that the homeless man just now was Jack the Ripper, but I think Sanako's sister is right about one thing. That person should also be a crucial figure in this game scene." Hearing Seiya's words, Conan immediately showed a dead fish face, and couldn't help but secretly push him and said, "Hey, even if you are protecting your sister, don't mislead everyone because of this kind of thing. No, I'm serious, and I really think that the homeless man just now is an important figure in this game scene." Conan, you probably don't play RPGs very often, so you probably don't know much about this kind of experience, right? Cocoon is a newly developed virtual reality game. Players who enter the game scene of Old London will play the role of detectives and uncover the true identity of Jack the Ripper. Besides the players, the other characters in the game, commonly known as NPCs, aside from Sherlock Holmes, who we're currently searching for, have you seen any NPCs approach us or deliberately attract our attention so far? After hearing Seiya's explanation, everyone present remained bewildered. After all, despite their rather large group, they were mostly children. The only two who appeared to be adults were Ran and Sanako. Ran's fighting skills were decent, but her IQ was average. As for Sanako, well, let's not talk about her. Seiya's point is that the homeless man was probably an NPC of the same type as Sherlock Holmes, someone who helps players in the game. Conan, understanding Seiya's meaning, took the initiative to explain for the others. Sherlock Holmes was a famous detective in 19th century London. I understand that he could help players. But what about that homeless man? I understand. It was the song he sang, but, if you don't want to die, you have to be covered in blood. What does this mean? With Conan's reminder, AI beside him also understood the meaning of Seiya's words, and looked at him with a puzzled look and asked, "Who knows? Maybe we can only get the answer if we actually meet Jack the Ripper." In response to AI's questioning, Seiya spread his hands to indicate that he had no idea, and that all this was just his speculation, and whether it was true or not was impossible to verify. However, what they didn't know was that when Seiya said that reasoning, Hideki Moriboshi beside him also raised the corner of his mouth slightly, and looked at Seiya with a look of admiration. Along the way, while deducing the lyrics of the Tramp song, they also arrived at 221B Baker Street where Sherlock Holmes was. However, to their great disappointment, Holmes's landlord said that Sherlock Holmes and his assistant Watson happened to be temporarily out of London for work. In short, Seiya and his friend's original plan to ask Holmes, the big boss, for help in solving the case was now stillborn. In the outside world, Kudo Yusaku and others were also surprised to see Seiya and his friends go to Holmes' house but come up empty-handed. The storyline of the game's Old London setting was written by mystery novelist Yusaku Kudo. Even the in-game characters of Sherlock Holmes and Watson are himself and Dr. Agasa. According to the original storyline, players were supposed to successfully find Holmes and, with his help, find Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper's true identity is a terminally ill nobleman with a dying age. However, Seiya and his friends haven't found Holmes at 221B Baker Street, and a homeless man playing a violin has appeared, a figure they shouldn't have. This immediately leads Kudo and his friends to realize that Noah's Ark, through its manipulation of the game, has altered the storyline. In other words, players were supposed to simply find Holmes and then be carried along by the boss, winning the game effortlessly. This level of difficulty is perfectly suited to the age of the children experiencing Cocoon at the press conference. But thanks to Noah's Ark's interference, players have gone from supporting roles to the main force in the hunt for Jack the Ripper, even without the help of Sherlock Holmes. The game's difficulty has increased significantly. It seems we underestimated Noah's Ark. It's assumed we'd help those children, so it deliberately altered the plot and increased the game's difficulty. Dr. Agasa, sitting at his computer, was still trying to figure out how to contact Conan and the others in the game again and provide them with clues. But now it seems the game's plot is completely different. Any clues they could provide have either been erased by Noah's Ark or are irrelevant to the altered plot. Damn it, this damned AI, is it just going to drive those children to their deaths? Once those children are rescued, I'm going to smash this thing up and throw it in the garbage dump. Kagoro Mori had long been annoyed with the arrogant Noah's Ark. Seeing him cheating and constantly increasing the difficulty of the game, he was so furious that he was about to smash the computer in front of him. Calm down. If Noah's Ark really wanted to kill those children, there was no need for such a move. And that homeless man with a hand violin, who wasn't originally in the plot, is also quite interesting. Fortunately, the child named Seiya noticed his uniqueness. If it were those children, I believe they would definitely be able to find the true answer. After all, there's no such thing as a perfect crime. Everything leaves some clues. Don't you agree, Chairman Sindora? Sindora, who had been sitting nearby, was visibly stunned when Kudo Yusaku suddenly called out his name. Inspector Major, standing nearby, had already detected the unusual tone in Kudo Yusaku's words and quickly spoke up. Brother Kudo, have you deduced Mr. Kashimira's murderer? Hearing the conversation between Kudo Yusaku and Major, Sindora stood up immediately and said angrily, Kudo Yusaku, are you trying to accuse me of hurting Kashimira? Although Kashimira is an employee of my company and one of the heroes who developed Cocoon, do I have any motive to kill him? And where is the evidence? With my social status, do you know how serious the consequences of a false accusation without evidence are? Chapter 317. Can this kid predict the future? It's hard to say what the motive for the crime is for now. Perhaps we'll get the answer after Conan and the others finish the game. But as for the evidence, we've already found it. Chairman Sindora, the weapon you used to kill Mr. Kashimira should be the dagger on the sculpture in the venue, right? Because a large number of celebrities have gathered here today, everyone will pass through metal detectors before entering the venue. This eliminates the possibility that the murderer brought the murder weapon into the venue. In other words, the murder weapon used by the murderer was in the venue from the beginning. Yes, the murder weapon I'm talking about is the dagger on the sculpture, but there are so many guests at the venue. If someone took the dagger, it should be easily noticed, right? When Inspector Major patrolled the venue before, he naturally discovered the statue that Kudo Yusaku mentioned, but as he said, the statue was in a very conspicuous position in the venue. If someone climbed up to take the dagger, it should have been noticed by no one. That's because the killer had planned ahead, pulling it out when the lights went out. After all, when the lights are out, everyone's attention is focused on Cocoon, the centerpiece of the press conference. Furthermore, to avoid detection, the killer crafted a fake dagger out of aluminum foil, replacing it with the original one after the attack. The aluminum foil dagger is relatively easy to destroy. Of course, the most compelling evidence came later when I commissioned someone to conduct a light-sensitive and fingerprint testing study on the sculpture's dagger. They discovered that the dagger reacted to Kashimira's blood type, and that Chairman Sindora's fingerprints were on the hilt. Upon hearing Kudo Yusaku's reasoning, Inspector Major, Shiratori, and the others turned to look at Sindora behind them in surprise. However, faced with this almost irrefutable evidence, Sindora remained calm and said, just based on this, you're concluding I'm Kashimira's murderer. Don't forget, the sculpture was originally moved here by my family. I like that dagger very much, so I play with it from time to time, so there are my fingerprints on it. This is not a strange thing, right? However, in response to Sindora's statement, Kudo Yusaku seemed to have anticipated it and took out a videotape from his arms. There are surveillance cameras installed all around this venue, and the videotape in my hand is exactly the footage captured by the surveillance cameras before the incident. The young Seiya also approached the statue before the incident and took down the dagger from the sculpture to play with it. He was eventually scolded by his sister and put the dagger back to its original place. After hearing this, Inspector Major also showed a look of sudden enlightenment and said, so that's how it is. This means that if the dagger on the sculpture is still the original one, then in addition to Chairman Sindora's fingerprints, there should also be the fingerprints of the young Seiya. And now, since only you, Chairman Sindora, have fingerprints, that means, before Inspector Major could finish his words, Sindora stubbornly stated, that's because after the young Seiya touched the dagger, I touched it again, and his fingerprints were obliterated. Although everyone present knew Sindora's explanation was far-fetched, given his status and position. They were completely helpless without irrefutable evidence. However, just as Sindora's argument was about to begin, Officer Chiba excitedly entered, holding an evidence bag. Inspector Major, Mrs. Suzuki just came to us and handed us a half-burned aluminum foil dagger. According to Mrs. Suzuki, her son, Seiya Suzuki, happened to see someone stealthily burning something in the underground garbage dump while using the restroom. Suspecting the person was suspicious, Seiya quickly put out the fire after the person left, so only a small portion of the aluminum foil dagger was burned. Comparing their appearance, we discovered that this aluminum foil dagger is identical to the one on the sculpture at the venue, and it also bears the fingerprints of both the young Seiya and Chairman Sindora. After hearing what Officer Chiba said, Inspector NERvGear and the others all turned to look at Sindora and said, besides the young Seiya's fingerprints on this fake dagger, the only other person who could have been found could be the murderer. Do you have anything else to explain on this point, Chairman Sindora? Looking at Seiya touching the dagger and the tape on the screen, and then hearing from Officer Chiba again that the evidence he had not completely destroyed was also discovered by this kid called Seiya, Sindora couldn't help but curse in his heart. Thomas Sindora, actually fell twice in a row at the hands of a kid. If he didn't know it was impossible, Sindora would even doubt whether the kid called Suzuki Seiya had the ability to predict the future. Seiya, yes, you guessed right, excluding all possibilities, the last impossible is the answer. In fact, what Sindora didn't know was that Seiya didn't want to be so prominent, but there was really no way. After he pretended to be cool and blew up Hideki Moriboshi's football, he realized belatedly that it was important evidence to prove that Sindora killed Kashimura. In the original story, it was Hideki Moriboshi who left a fingerprint on the dagger. He accidentally dropped the dagger while playing soccer at the event and then picked it up. However, this time, Hideki Moriboshi's group of rich second-generation players' soccer balls were destroyed by him. If he hadn't knocked the dagger off, how could he have left the fingerprints proving Sindora's murder? So, out of desperation, Seiya was forced to take his place and become the boy who left the fingerprints. This is why, in the videotape, Seiya reaches for the dagger out of curiosity and is scolded by Sanako. As for finding the aluminum foil dagger that Sindora used to destroy evidence, that was truly a coincidence. Due to some plot twists, Seiya, worried that his pretentious behavior might lead to a bad ending, took advantage of a break to urinate and seized the evidence of Sindora's crime. Unexpectedly, Sindora, who had originally just discarded the aluminum foil dagger in the underground garbage dump, now attempted to completely destroy the evidence with a fire. Fortunately, after the other party set the dagger on fire, in order to avoid being away from the venue for too long and causing suspicion, he hurriedly left. As soon as the other party left, Seiya quickly stepped out and put out the flames on the dagger. He then handed the evidence to Suzuki Tomoko, asking her to hand it over to the detective in charge of the investigation at an appropriate time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318 Sindora has also entered the game. That's pure nonsense. Where's your motive? Where's my motive for harming Kenmura? I'm going to file a complaint with your local authorities. If you don't have a motive for killing Kenmura, then your so-called reasoning and evidence are nothing but conjecture. I absolutely cannot accept such an outcome. Hearing Sindora's stubborn rhetoric, Inspector NERvGear and his team were furious, but they knew they were completely helpless against him. If this crime had been committed by a local, even the evidence they had would have been sufficient for his arrest. The problem, however, was that Sindora wasn't a local, regardless of the country. If this crime had been committed internationally, things would have become quite complicated. Furthermore, Thomas Sindora was the chairman of Sindora Corporation, possessing considerable social status and standing. Even in this situation, Inspector NERvGear and his team could only temporarily place him under house arrest and surveillance. To fully apprehend him, they would need to apply for a formal arrest warrant. Simply put, the criminals they'd caught before were minor foes, but this time the killer was a bit more powerful, and even Inspector NERvGear was having trouble keeping him under control. Damn it, Shiratori, you and Chiba took Chairman Sindora back to his room. Until this case is resolved, we need to keep him under strict protection. Brother Mori, Brother Kudo, I'll leave this matter to you for now. I need to apply for a formal arrest warrant. Sindora tried to resist, but two fists were no match for four, and Shiratori and Chiba ultimately confined him to his room. Damn it, these damn detectives, and that nosy brat. Whether it's Hiroki or that brat named Seiya, are these supposedly geniuses always this nosy? Hiroki, his adopted son, had developed the DNA matching system out of curiosity about Jack the Ripper's dagger, thus exposing the Sindora family's greatest secret. The same thing happened to the little Seiya this time. If he hadn't been so careless as to touch the dagger on the sculpture and keep the fake one he was supposed to destroy, how could he have left behind such deadly evidence? After officers Shiratori and Chiba left, Sindora, who was under house arrest, suddenly took on a gloomy expression. He knew full well that his identity and status only guaranteed his temporary safety. If those children learned the answer in the old London game scene, he would be doomed. However, just as Sindra glanced around the room, searching for an escape hatch, he unexpectedly discovered that this room appeared to be the one where Kenmura had previously developed and tested the cocoon. In the corner of this room, a spherical object was covered with black cloth. As Sindra excitedly approached and lifted the cloth, his previously gloomy face suddenly broke into a sinister grin. As expected, this is the initial test machine for Cocoon. If I remember correctly, Jianken's development report stated that the developer test machine allows players to enter the game scene as characters, dividing line in the world of Cocoon, set in the game scene of Old World London. Seiya and his companions sought help from Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street, but came up empty-handed. Mistaken for children from the Baker Street guerrillas, they were eventually invited into Holmes's house by his butler. Inside Holmes's home, Seiya and his companions uncovered several useful clues. Seiya also learned that Jack the Ripper was connected to Professor Moriarty, the second most dangerous figure in 19th century London. Professor Moriarty was Holmes's mortal enemy and a major figure in the underworld of Old London. To find the mysterious Professor Moriarty, they first needed to locate his most trusted subordinate, Colonel Moran. Holmes's notes contained information about Colonel Moran's whereabouts. Because of this, Seiya and his companions, at Conan's suggestion, decided to search for Colonel Moran at the poker club he frequented. As they left Holmes's room, Hideki Moriboshi spotted a revolver in Holmes's locker and took it. The other wealthy second generations who witnessed their actions, having gradually come to appreciate Seiya and Conan's abilities after the previous incidents, began to question him, feeling somewhat guilty. Morahis, isn't this a bit inappropriate for us to do? Yeah, if Suzuki Seiya finds out, he'll probably kick us out again. Upon hearing what his companions, Naki Moriki and Kakuyokashi Ichiro, said, Hideki Moriboshi ignored them and tucked his revolver into his waistband. He then looked at them with disapproval and said, "Those brats have fooled you too. Why should we listen to their orders? We have to rely on ourselves if we want to survive, so what if that brat Seiya Suzuki is so powerful? Now we all have guns in our hands, is it his turn to show off?" After hearing what Hideki Moriboshi said, several rich second generations soon could not refute him anymore. After all, they could not afford to offend the Suzuki group, and they also could not afford to offend a bureaucrat's son like Hideki Moriboshi. When the group came to the poker club where Colonel Moran was based on Holmes's information, Conan originally wanted to let Seiya, who had good combat power, sneak into the club with him, while the others were responsible for staying outside. But it was obvious that the naughty kids who were the three fools of Teton were quite dissatisfied with the task of staying behind, and thought that Conan and Seiya wanted to leave them and solve the case by themselves. Under the instigation of Hideki Moriboshi, several rich second generations did not want to miss this opportunity to show off, so even though it was a dangerous infiltration mission, these guys rushed to die. In that case, Sister Sanako and I will be responsible for staying outside. If something happens outside, we can send you a signal, and even if you are unfortunately wiped out, we will not be wiped out completely. Seiya was really not interested in the job of a babysitter, and it was best to let Conan do this kind of thing. After hearing Seiya's suggestion, Conan first looked at the group of problem children around him, and then looked at Seiya who had already pulled Sanako to hide in a corner, and suddenly his face was speechless. To be honest, the infiltration team that Conan wanted to assign at first was an elite team consisting of him, Seiya, and Xiaolin. After all, although Colonel Moran was just a lackey of Professor Moriarty, he was also a dangerous figure in the gang. When confronting such a dangerous existence, they could not be careless. Chapter 319 How to Win When All Kinds of Debuffs Are Stacked? With his own deductive abilities, Seiya's observation in action, and Rand's fighting prowess, with this lineup, even if they encounter danger, they have a high chance of escaping unscathed when confronting Colonel Moran. But now, it's okay, Conan. I'll take care of you, Rand said, looking at Conan's expression of despair, and she explained that they were following him because they were worried about him. Upon hearing Rand's words of comfort, Conan's face shifted to a smile that looked uglier than tears. Honestly, if you're truly worried about me, you should have stayed outside. It's true that quantitative change leads to qualitative change, but the key question is the direction of that qualitative change. Is it for your benefit or disadvantage? It was obvious that Conan now felt that infiltrating the enemy's lair with a bunch of restless brats was worse than going it alone. Ran and those brats should be fine, right? As the only older sister in the group, Sanako felt quite ashamed of letting a bunch of kids take risks while she stayed behind to keep watch. But she had no other options. After all, she only had one brother, and she couldn't just leave Seiya alone to keep watch. What if something unexpected happened outside? Seiya, a child, could handle it. Besides, having grown up with Ran, she was well aware of her bestie's fighting prowess. She could break rocks with her bare hands and even dodge bullets. To Sanako, her bestie's fighting prowess was simply inhuman. Under normal circumstances, there shouldn't be a problem. But now, with the Titan 3 idiots and a few other rich kids looking for trouble, the debuffs are practically piled up. It would be strange if they didn't fail. Sanako was initially puzzled by her brother's words. Just as she was about to ask, she heard bursts of gunfire and fighting from the poker club. Clearly, just as Seiya had said, Conan, with a bunch of scoundrels and a ton of debuffs, was going to have no chance of success. Having infiltrated a poker club and seen his target, Colonel Morin, cheating to win money, Conan was still trying to figure out how to negotiate with him. Who knew that the rich kids, led by Moriboshi Hideki, would suddenly show up at this critical moment, taunting Colonel Morin with the revolvers they'd stolen from Holmes. Colonel Morin might be Professor Moriarty's lackey, but he was still a gangster boss. How could he be frightened by a few brats? After knocking Hideki Moriboshi's revolver out of his hand with a playing card, a brawl erupted. Colonel Morin, in particular, picked up Hideki Moriboshi's dropped revolver and discovered the initials of Sherlock Holmes on it. He roared, "Kill all those brats! They're Holmes's men." If he hadn't known Conan and the others, Morin would have likely captured them for questioning. But since the revolver had already confirmed Conan and his men's identities, Colonel Morin naturally wouldn't hold back. After all, Professor Moriarty and Holmes were sworn enemies, and as one of the professor's trusted lieutenants, Colonel Morin naturally considered Holmes a thorn in his side. The outcome of a brawl between a group of bratty kids and a London gang was obvious. While Rain was formidable, she was no match for the other gang. Protecting so many children alone was clearly impossible, especially since many of them were armed. The three other wealthy second generations, excluding Hideki Moriboshi, were eliminated in the shootout. The Titan 3 idiots, meanwhile, were also eliminated after suffering heavy blows while protecting Conan, Ran, and AI. Overall, however, the Titan 3 idiots didn't cause as much trouble as they had in previous operations, and their deaths were more meaningful than those of the wealthy second generations. As the lights dimmed and the cocoons containing Takazuo Shinaya, Amori Akira, and Kikukashi Ichiro slowly sank into the audience as they exited, their parents burst into tears. Some even glared at Hideki Moriboshi's grandfather, the deputy commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Department. From the outside, these parents witnessed clearly how Seiya and Conan performed exceptionally well in the game, and their children seemed to have grown considerably from the experience. If it weren't for Hideki Moriboshi's constant attempts to sow discord and his reckless behavior, their children might have remained clinging to the Suzuki-san's leg and survived to the end. Why are you looking at me like that? Children have their own minds. If you knew how to educate them, why would they follow that brat of mine? Hearing the Metropolitan Police Department Deputy Commissioner's words, the parents of Kikukashi Ichiro and the others were left speechless. Indeed, their children's current state was inextricably linked to their unscrupulous doting and the upbringing they'd given them since childhood. Their indulgence had led to their arrogant and undisciplined behavior. Their misguided upbringing had influenced their children, who, at a young age, became sycophantic, obedient to the more powerful Moriboshi family, while looking down on the children of ordinary families. MRS. Suzuki, the safety of those children now depends entirely on your children. Although their own children had been eliminated, the parents hadn't completely given up hope. After all, as Noah's Ark had said, if just one person could survive to complete the game, the others would be saved as well. Everyone had witnessed Suzuki Seiya's performance so far, believing him to be the children's greatest hope for rescue. Of course, the bespectacled younger brother had also performed quite well, but ultimately, Seiya had made a far greater impression on the others at the banquet. There was another reason, one all the celebrities present knew, yet tacitly agreed. Conan, no matter how talented he was merely the child of a commoner, while Seiya, the heir to the Suzuki group, represented the upper class. If the person who ultimately saved all the children was a child of a commoner, wouldn't it mean that the children of the upper class, who had received an elite education, were inferior to those of the peasants? Therefore, these upper-class people preferred the young master of the Suzuki group to Conan as their rescuer. After all, if these children, who boasted of their elite upbringing, were ultimately saved by a child from an ordinary family, they would become a laughingstock. Chapter 320, Taking Professor Moriarty Hostage. In a poker club, a scene from an old-world London game, Conan watched his companions fall, a grimace on his face. Colonel Morin and his henchmen were armed with guns. Even for Ran, no matter how formidable she was, she would soon find herself in a tough fight. He had noticed an empty seat at the table where Colonel Morin and his companions sat, set with fine wine and glasses, and even the chairs were decorated with ornamental carvings. With just a glance, Conan determined the empty seat was reserved for Professor Moriarty. So, when Conan spotted a gangster cautiously holding a bottle of wine in the crowd, a plan suddenly struck him. Taking advantage of the chaos, he managed to snatch the bottle. However, just as Conan grabbed the wine and threatened to destroy it to force Colonel Morin and his men to stop, Ran, who had been trying to protect AI, was accidentally knocked down by Morin from behind, who then pressed a gun against her head. "Kid, if you dare to do anything again, I'll blow this girl's head off." Seeing the wine meant for Professor Moriarty being taken by Conan, Colonel Morin glared at his worthless subordinate, poked Ran's head with his gun, and threatened Conan. The wine in the upper hand, the specially decorated chair, and the carefully prepared wine, if I'm not mistaken, the wine in my hand was specially prepared for the professor, right? I wonder how Professor Moriarty would react to you if he knew that your negligent actions had caused the wine he was about to enjoy to be destroyed. Colonel Morin's face darkened with rage at Conan's threatening words. However, as one of the gang's leaders, even if he feared Professor Moriarty's wrath, he wouldn't let a mere, barely grown brat lead him by the nose. "Don't try to threaten me, brat." The wine was indeed prepared for Professor Moriarty, that's for sure. But you're Holmes' men. If we catch you all this time, I'm sure the professor won't blame us too much. Besides, there's plenty of wine in London, and with a little time, finding a replacement wouldn't be difficult. But I wonder if I can find a replacement for the woman I'm holding. Hearing Colonel Morin's words, Conan's brow furrowed. This turn of events had completely defied his expectations. If Xiaolin hadn't fallen into his clutches, the wine he had might have deterred Colonel Morin. But now, he might have something Colonel Morin valued, but Xiaolin, in his hands, was someone he cared about even more. Simply put, the bargaining chips he currently held were no longer sufficient to sustain his negotiations with Colonel Morin. "Kids, I'll give you one chance. Hand over the wine, and I'll release this woman. As for whether you can make it out of here alive, that depends on your own abilities." Hearing Colonel Morin's smirking words, Conan hesitated. He didn't want Ran to leave here, not just out of personal sentiment, but also because, once they discovered Jack the Ripper's true identity, Ran's fighting prowess would be essential to his capture or defeat. Seiya might be formidable, but he was still just a child, making Conan unable to place all his bets on him. Furthermore, even if he could temporarily buy Ran back with the wine, could the few remaining men survive the ensuing hail of gunfire? "Kid, have you thought it through? I'll give you 10 seconds. If you still can't make up your mind, say goodbye to this girl. 10, 9, 85, 4, 3 inches weight x2." Just as Conan, after a long period of deliberation, finally reached a decision and opened his mouth, a voice suddenly echoed from the doorway, synchronized with his own. "If Professor Moriarty's wine isn't enough leverage, then I wonder if adding him himself will be enough to convince you to spare our lives." The person who had just spoken in unison with Conan was undoubtedly Seiya, who had been keeping watch outside. Everyone present was stunned when they saw the figures pushing through the door. It was impossible not to be stunned, because Seiya hadn't come in alone, but had been carried by someone. More precisely, Seiya's small form was now leaning against an old man's back, one arm hooked around his neck, the other holding a sharp, gleaming fruit knife against his neck. Conan and the others were surprised that Seiya, who had been keeping watch outside, suddenly came to the rescue. Colonel Morin and his men were astonished that Professor Moriarty, the second most dangerous man in London, was now in the hands of a child, barely even grown, and even held hostage at knife point. "So, this old man is really the professor you all mentioned before, the second most dangerous man in London." Sanako, though not a bright person, was not completely foolish. Seeing how Colonel Morin and his men, previously so arrogant, were now so timid, she naturally understood that Seiya had the right man. You see, Seiya had outlined this strategy to them when they, who had been waiting outside, realized a fight had broken out inside the club and a group of people were slowly approaching. Colonel Morin and his men had guns, so even if they went in to help, it would only mean 2 more deaths. Recalling the scene in the story where Conan threatened Colonel Morin with wine, Seiya suddenly had an even more daring idea. If Professor Moriarty's bottle of wine could make Colonel Morin hesitate, wouldn't taking the professor directly be equivalent to taking down the entire London Mafia? So, as soon as Professor Moriarty's carriage approached the club, Seiya took immediate action. Sanako pretended to be tripped by a passerby, causing the carriage to stop. As the carriage stopped, Seiya leaped aboard with lightning speed and, guided by the scent of his cologne, placed a fruit knife he'd found at Holmes's house against the driver's neck. Seeing Seiya's success, Sanako was initially puzzled as to why her brother would take a groom hostage instead of the Professor Moriarty in the carriage. But then, seeing the situation, she understood, the one in the carriage was the fake. Chapter 321 Shengaya, if you dare to touch her, I will kill your whole family. I'm a little curious. I shouldn't know you, but why did you seem to have confirmed when you took action that the Moriarty in the carriage was fake, and I was the real one? Seeing Colonel Morin's exposed expression, Professor Moriarty also realized that it was meaningless to continue pretending, so he asked Seiya, who was leaning behind him with some confusion. Holmes's notes say that Professor Moriarty is a mysterious and cautious figure, so secretive that only his trusted aide, Colonel Morin, knows his true identity. Furthermore, prominent figures often prefer to use body doubles to keep themselves safe. Of course, the main reason is that you have too many flaws. Rumor has it that Professor Moriarty is a fashionable old man who loves to wear cologne. Even if you exchanged clothes with a groom, the scent won't deceive you. That's the first point. And I don't think the average groom would have the money to buy such expensive leather shoes. Changing clothes without changing shoes is the second thing you've exposed. Professor Moriarty is a powerful figure in London. A groom who can drive for him, besides being a trusted aide, must also be an excellent driver. But your driving skills are so mediocre that you almost hit the poorly acting Sanako-san. Would a prominent figure hire such a poor driver? After hearing Seiya's reasoning, even Professor Moriarty, who now had a knife at his throat, couldn't help but applaud with admiration. What a brilliant deduction. Coupled with your skills, it's hard to believe you're just a child. You'd resort to such tactics to hold me hostage. You're definitely not one of Holmes's men, are you? At least, I don't believe that Holmes's band of stray kids could pull off something like you. Although Professor Moriarty and Holmes were sworn enemies, they knew each other well. Holmes was passionate about investigating and deducing cases, and he generally refrained from taking drastic action without solid evidence. Therefore, judging by Seiya's style, he didn't believe Seiya was acting on Holmes' orders, or even that he was one of Holmes' men. Professor, we have no real connection to Holmes, and we have no intention of becoming your enemies. However, it seems your men have had a misunderstanding with us. Before we sit down to talk, could you please have your men release my friends? Upon hearing Seiya's words, Sanako had already rushed up to Colonel Morin, aggressively pushing and shoving the towering figure in an attempt to rescue her best friend. Seeing Sanako's insolence, Colonel Morin, who had never experienced such humiliation before, was about to raise his gun and kill the woman before him, but a cold voice stopped him. If you dare touch a hair on her head, not only will your boss die, but the rest of you will too. If you think I'm just a brat and you ignored my warning, then you're welcome. Not only you, but I'll also find your families and bury them all with you. Seeing Sanako suddenly pointed at Seiya, who had previously appeared gentle, like a boy next door, suddenly erupted with a chilling murderous intent. Even Colonel Morin, a veteran of many trials and tribulations, felt a wave of fear when he sensed the murderous intent emanating from Seiya and the murderous look in his eyes. Professor Moriarty, who was closest to Seiya, was especially surprised by the murderous intent he felt. Although he couldn't see Seiya's face due to his back, he was deeply surprised by the tangible murderous intent. He couldn't understand why Seiya, who appeared to be just a brat, could possess such a terrifying aura. Was Jack the Ripper a lunatic? It was only after a series of crimes that he gradually slipped out of his control. But how old is this brat holding him hostage now? His murderous intent and aura alone are enough to intimidate a ruthless man like Colonel Morin. What kind of brat is this? This is a monster, even crazier than Jack the Ripper. The reason he hasn't gone berserk yet is probably because the woman before him has become a shackle that binds and protects him. Without this shackle, the world would be filled with a true demon. Professor Moriarty's current strategy for this true lunatic is to avoid provoking him if possible. After all, There's no animosity between them. If you were truly provoked, who knows what he'd do? And don't forget, his life is in his hands. Trying to reason with a madman is undoubtedly foolish. Morin, do as this young lady says. Honestly, even if Professor Moriarty hadn't said it, Colonel Morin wasn't ready to fight Seiya to the death. From the murderous intent and predatory eyes that Seiya had just radiated, Colonel Morin was absolutely certain that the other man was a truly ruthless thug. The lives lost on his own hands were likely small fry compared to his. Furthermore, the child's appearance definitely didn't reflect his true age. After all, this world wasn't without strange conditions like dwarfism. Did you hear what your boss said? Release Xylan immediately, or I'll have my younger brother kill your entire family. Seeing Colonel Morin and his men frightened, Sanako, with her hands on her hips, looked incredibly proud. She even thought to herself, these 19th century London gangs weren't that big of a deal. Her younger brother had only just threatened them, and they'd actually backed down. If she'd known they were so timid, she could have handled everything on her own. Conan and the others, having been rescued, were speechless at Sanako's impassive nature. Professor Moriarty and Colonel Morin were both dangerous figures in 19th century London. Would they be frightened by such a joking threat? It was clear that the aura emanating from Seiya's recent threats was completely different from Sanako's bullying, but they simply couldn't grasp the subtle difference. It was perfectly normal for Professor Moriarty and Colonel Morin to feel a pang of fear at Seiya's presence. After all, while he might be a wealthy young man in this world, he had experienced countless bloody battles in other worlds. As for Conan and the others' failure to notice, it was naturally because Seiya's murderous intent hadn't been directed at them. However, the only person present who thought gangsters like Colonel Morin were immune to fear was the remarkably insensitive Sanako. Of course, this was largely due to Sanako's belief that her younger brother was a well-behaved and sensible person, someone who would intimidate even thugs. She had never considered the possibility that her younger brother would be feared by thugs. Chapter 322 Sanako, our Seiya is a good boy. Who are you, and why are you bothering us? In the poker club, Professor Moriarty's bottle of high-end red wine had been opened. Meanwhile, at the long dining table, Professor Moriarty, seemingly enjoying his glass of wine, seemed unfazed by the revolver pointed at him by Seiya, who sat across from him. It wasn't that Professor Moriarty was fearless, but rather that he knew full well that since Seiya hadn't initially attempted to kill him, but instead wanted to sit down and talk with him, he had something to ask of him. Seiya was about to take the wine glass offered by Colonel Morin, but a second later, Sanako snatched it away. You little brat, why are you trying to imitate others and drinking wine? Before Seiya could even take a sip of the glass and savor the taste of this high-end 19th century wine, Sanako slapped him on the head, even snatching the wine from his hand. But Sanako-san, this is a game. Seiya felt that his hard-won prestige would quickly fall apart whenever his sister was around. And to be honest, he was indeed quite craving the wine Professor Moriarty was drinking. Don't forget, Cocoon is a virtual reality game that fully simulates all 5 senses. In other words, the brain receives the same signals from the delicious food tasted here, simulating the sensations of the real thing. Professor Moriarty, a prominent figure in late 19th century London, couldn't possibly be drinking ordinary wine? It was the 19th century, and the wine he was drinking could easily be a high-end vintage from the 18th or even the 17th century. Even for the powerful Suzuki Group, acquiring such a wine in the real world would be a difficult task. Even games are out of the question. Wine is too young for a kid like you, so let your sister Sanako help you taste it. Seiya looked helpless at his sister's dictatorial behavior. Sanako, after unceremoniously draining the wine from her glass, her eyes suddenly lit up. Ran, this wine tastes really good. That person over there, yes, Zayamo, hurry up and pour me another glass, or I'll kill your whole family. Even Sanako, a daughter of a wealthy family, had tasted many fine wines, and after tasting Professor Moriarty's collection, she couldn't help but burst into praise. She was so smug that she even mistook Colonel Morin for a waiter, asking him to pour her another glass. Hearing Sanako's words, Colonel Morin's expression twisted even further. He swore that if he and his men weren't in such a vulnerable position, he would have tortured this woman and thrown her into the underground black market as a prostitute. Sanako, that's enough. We're not really old enough to drink at this age. Seeing Colonel Morin's grim expression, Ran whispered to her bestie not to get too carried away. Because Sanako was the last to come in with Seiya, She hadn't seen Colonel Morin's ruthless side. He was the type who wouldn't hesitate to hit even a child. Now her bestie was treating him like a waiter, clearly courting death. What's the big deal? It's just a low-proof red wine, and this is a game. Try trying it too. It's really delicious. If this red wine were sold outside, you wouldn't be able to buy it even if you had money. Hearing Sanako's words, Seiya was speechless. His sister wasn't old enough to drink yet, but now she was using the game as an excuse to enjoy fine wine. And yet, under the same pretext, he was being restricted. It was truly abhorrent. Ha 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 ha, this young lady has great taste. The rare wine I drink is truly priceless. Since you're both wine lovers, and this young lady loves it so much, Morin, why don't you pour them another glass? Upon hearing Professor Moriarty's words, Colonel Morin, looking frustrated, could only step forward and pour the wine like a waiter. Professor, let's not waste any more time on this nonsense. Our target this time is Jack the Ripper. Based on the information left in Holmes' notebook, you should have some connection to him, so we need your help in catching him. Seeing Sanako and the others acting unreliable, Conan jumped out and explained the purpose. You're looking for Jack the Ripper? Can I know why? Is he someone you know? Or does he have some grudge against you? Professor Moriarty was surprised to hear that Seiya and the others were looking for Jack the Ripper. As a deranged killer, Jack the Ripper had no friends or family, and barely any social life at all. Professor Moriarty couldn't understand why Seiya and his group, if they weren't Holmes's men, were searching for him. Could it be that some of the women Jack the Ripper had recently murdered were relatives or friends of those individuals? We have no direct connection to Jack the Ripper. To be honest, we're only searching for him to bring him to justice. Seiya's words stunned Professor Moriarty again. He then looked at Seiya with a puzzled expression and asked, would someone like you also uphold justice for the innocent? Or are you targeting Jack the Ripper simply because his actions challenged your authority? Given the murderous intent Seiya had previously exuded, Professor Moriarty didn't believe him to be a kind person. He even believed that Seiya had probably killed more people than Jack the Ripper himself. Professor Moriarty found it ironic that a villain like Seiya was now talking about upholding justice. Hey, what do you mean by someone like you, old man? Don't make it sound like my brother is some ruthless villain, okay? Hearing Sanako's protective rant, Professor Moriarty shook his head without refutation. He finally spoke. Jack the Ripper was indeed adopted by me as a child, and I trained him to be a killer for me. However, due to his childhood experiences and his personality, he's recently begun to lose control. I was about to give up on him, but since you're willing to help me deal with him, I naturally don't mind. Although he's out of control now, he's still somewhat obedient to my orders. Tomorrow, I'll place a notice in the newspaper asking him to kill. If you wish to do anything, try to stop him. Chapter 323, Syndra becomes Jack the Ripper. At the same time, just as Seiya was confronting Professor Moriarty and the others, in a dim alleyway in 19th century London, a slender, tall figure gazed at his blood-stained hands and the gruesomely deceased female corpse not far away, a look of surprise on his face. I can't believe this. I've always wanted to shed my hidden identity, but now I've been born into this world. Is this the guiding hand from my bloodline? Or is it fate? But hunting those little devils in my current identity is a perfect match. After mumbling some incomprehensible words, Jack the Ripper, having slaughtered yet another woman, left the dim alleyway. While all the cocoons at the press conference were now under the control of Noah's Ark, the cocoon Syndra was using was a test version used by game developers, possessing higher permissions than standard cocoons. Noah's Ark might be able to alter the plot of this game scene, but it couldn't control him, a stowaway. Indeed, the current Jack the Ripper is no longer the same Jack the Ripper from the beginning. While his outward appearance remains unchanged, his inner self has transformed into Thomas Syndra, freshly entered into his cocoon. To defeat Seiya and his fellow players, Syndra is forced to assume the role of a villain within the game scenario. However, whether it's fate or destiny, upon entering this game scenario, Syndra discovers he's become his own ancestor, Jack the Ripper. The truth he'd long sought to conceal, his murderous bloodline, now manifested in this way, strikes Syndra as incredibly ironic. However, despite the irony, he quickly accepts his role. After all, in this game scenario, Jack the Ripper is undoubtedly the most suitable character to be the executioner who murders those children. Drawing on the memories of Jack the Ripper, Syndra quickly comprehends his role, including details about his background and abilities within the game scenario. Oh, so this is the story Kudo Yusaku and Kenmura arranged for Jack the Ripper. The story of Jack the Ripper's origins in the game scenario couldn't possibly be completely true. After all, Jack the Ripper, a murderer active in the late 19th century, remained unapprehended until the very end, and his origins and true identity remained a matter of legend. Even Syndra, Jack the Ripper's descendant, didn't know anything about his ancestry, let alone outsiders. Being abandoned by his mother as a child might be true, but being adopted and raised by Professor Moriarty and trained to become a killer was undoubtedly fiction. After all, Professor Moriarty was a fictional character in the novel and couldn't possibly be connected to Jack the Ripper. Of course, they were in the Cocoon game scenario, and Professor Moriarty was the one who adopted and trained Jack the Ripper. Syndra also knew from the setting that Jack the Ripper read the newspaper every day, partly to see if the people he had killed had appeared in the newspapers. On the other hand, Professor Moriarty, his adoptive father, would publish a code in the newspaper whenever he ordered him to kill. Having been replaced by Syndra, Jack the Ripper naturally no longer obeyed Professor Moriarty's orders. Could a mere NPC in a game have the right to order Syndra to kill? Syndra's primary goal now was to eliminate Seiya and the others in the game. If they were all killed, unable to complete the game, their brains would eventually be erased by the artificial intelligence Noah's Ark. And his ultimate secret would be kept secret. As long as the DNA matching system remained hidden and Hiroki's relationship with Kenmura remained unknown, he had no motive to kill Kenmura. So what if Inspector Meiju and Kudo Yusaku had evidence? Syndra had power, connections, and was a foreigner. As long as he insisted he had no motive, he would have ample leverage to exonerate himself. Early this morning, Syndra was stunned when he saw the news in the newspaper. Professor Moriarty had given him a mission, and this time, he was to kill Holmes's beloved, Irene, a famous opera star. Honestly, upon seeing Moriarty's code word in the newspaper, Syndra initially dismissed it. But then he realized that Holmes was Moriarty's sworn enemy, and Irene was Holmes's beloved. Given Moriarty's character, he knew he would be on the scene when he assassinated Irene. While Syndra wasn't particularly interested in Holmes and Irene, he was deeply fascinated by Professor Moriarty. Professor Moriarty was a prominent figure in late 19th century London, commanding countless underlings. However, his whereabouts were elusive, making him difficult to track down. If he was also at the Opera House, wouldn't controlling him be equivalent to controlling the entire London underworld? Although Syndra now appears as Jack the Ripper, as the game's biggest boss, he remains somewhat uncertain. Especially since the imp named Suzuki Seiya is incredibly sinister. To increase his chances of victory, Syndra decides that controlling Professor Moriarty, and thereby taking control of London's underworld, is a good plan. By controlling London's underworld, he'll be able to easily locate the imps, no matter where they hide. Professor Moriarty, a man with sway over both the underworld and the underworld, can't win simply as Jack the Ripper. A simple human wave strategy would be enough to overwhelm Seiya's imps. Meanwhile, after deciphering the coded message Professor Moriarty had left for Jack the Ripper in the newspaper, Conan and the others were instantly enraged when they learned that the intended target was Holmes' beloved, Irene. Damn it. Professor Moriarty set us up. I never thought he'd use Irene as bait. Conan was a die-hard Sherlock Holmes fan, and as a devoted fanboy, he naturally didn't want to see Holmes's woman die tragically. So, having just left the orphanage they were investigating, they headed back to the Opera House. Seeing Conan's indignant expression, Seiya couldn't help but remind him, Conan, I've been wanting to say this since you warned Professor Moriarty last night about the Reichenbach Falls 3 years from now. Regardless of whether Professor Moriarty or Irene are fictional characters, even the place we're in is merely a scene in a game. Even if you're a die-hard Sherlock Holmes fan, I still want to remind you to make the right choice at the crucial moment. Chapter 324 Holy, have no feelings. Honestly, even Seiya was a bit confused during the Opera House scene. Irene was the woman Holmes cherished most, so it's understandable that Professor Moriarty wanted Jack the Ripper to kill her. In fact, if Conan and his men had ambushed her nearby, they would have had a good chance of arresting Jack the Ripper. Yet, the protagonists, to the end, seemed completely lost as to whether this was reality or a game. AI withdrew to protect Irene, and Ran was seemingly captured alive. The already dwindling team was left with only Conan and Hideki Moriboshi, who was being used as a stand-in. This suggests that Hiroki, the mastermind, was merciful and offered Conan a last-minute hint. Without Conan's original plan, he and Hideki Moriboshi wouldn't have survived. Honestly, if this were real life, leaving someone in danger to die would be a bit callous. But the point is, this is a virtual game. Irene is just a fictional character in the game. Even though she's portrayed as Conan's mother, Yukiko Kudo, what's the big deal? None of this is real. Despite warnings, Irene persists, determined to stay and risk her life. Conan and his friends stay to protect her, even going so far as to confront Jack the Ripper head-on. This, Seiya thinks, is sheer folly. Not only are they putting their companions in danger for a fictional character, but they also have 50 lives on their shoulders, no time for emotional overload. Just like the original storyline, Conan and his friends, under the guise of delivering flowers to Holmes, meet Irene, the woman Holmes deeply loves. Despite their persuasion, Irene, portrayed as Yukiko Kudo, stubbornly insists on continuing her performance. Conan and his friends are left with no choice but to act as Holmes' knights, protecting Irene from Jack the Ripper's clutches. Just take part in the deployment. I'm going to go it alone from now on, so don't count me in. Hearing Seiya's intention to act alone, Conan was baffled. From the very beginning of the game, Seiya, despite his ability, had always been quite sociable. Now, at this crucial juncture, almost at the end, Seiya, a key member of the team, was actually planning to go it alone. Seiya, don't you think our deployment is unreasonable? Conan could see the emotion in Seiya's words, but he didn't understand why. Was it because he was giving the orders? No, if that was the reason, Seiya had already fallen out with those rich second generations due to their instigation. I am very dissatisfied with your arrangement, and I have no interest in helping Holmes as a flower protector. To be honest, in this game scene, Holmes did not help us at all, right? Now we are in danger for his woman. We have already given her advice. Since the woman is stubborn, let her bear the consequences herself, and we will have a greater chance of catching Jack the Ripper. But now you are obsessed with a night game, and you are going to waste a lot of manpower to protect such a willful woman. Is it just because she has Aunt Yukiko's face? When Conan and Xiaolin heard Seiya's opinion, they were stunned, because they did not expect that the point that made Seiya disagree was here. But this is not surprising. After all, Kudo Yukiko is special to Conan and Xiaolin. They cannot bear to see Irene with that face being killed by others. Seiya also said that he can understand. I understand you might think I'm being unkind, even cold-blooded, but I can only say this is the most rational decision. I've considered my proposal, and you're definitely not going to accept it, so I've decided to go it alone. Seiya then turned and left. Sonako glanced at her best friend Ran, then at her brother, and after a brief hesitation, she decided to follow him. Sister, just follow Ran and the others. I can promise that no matter what happens, I'll bring you back to the real world safely. Seeing Seiya's determined face, Sonako smiled reassuringly. She gently stroked Seiya's head, saying, "Yes, sister, I believe you can do it." After Seiya left, Conan fell into deep thought. He finally understood what Seiya had meant by making the right choice. Honestly, Seiya's approach was undoubtedly more rational and correct. However, Conan simply couldn't use Irene as bait, or even watch her get stabbed by Jack the Ripper, even if she was just a virtual character. Seiya understands Conan's inability to act that way. After all, in anime, at least 9 out of 10 male protagonists are quite submissive. Seiya also wants to be a submissive protagonist, but unfortunately, he doesn't want to take that risk right now, and he doesn't dare to. Perhaps because of this little butterfly's intrusion, the plot has evolved considerably compared to the original. Seiya's own safety is secondary. The electrical current released by his cocoon alone would be nearly impossible to kill him. But what about Sonako? He couldn't risk his family's lives for a virtual character. Anyone who loves submissives can be submissive. Seiya is now emotionless and even terrifyingly rational. After leaving the opera house, Seiya headed straight for the nearest train station. If he remembered correctly, according to the original plot, after attacking the opera house, Jack the Ripper would disguise himself as a woman, a British noblewoman, and hide among the passengers on the train. Seiya's current task was to wait for the Ripper on the train at the station. If the defeated Jack the Ripper reached this station, Seiya would not give him any chance and would kill him immediately, ending the game once and for all. Did your friends always behave like this? At the opera house, watching Seiya leave alone, Moriboshi Hideki asked curiously, looking at Conan and AI beside him. Honestly, apart from the high school students Ran and Sonako, and the other members of the Junior Detective League from modest backgrounds, Seiya was Hiroki's favorite among the wealthy second generations. He was both capable and talented, intelligent, and free of the usual arrogance and spoiled pride that often plagued the wealthy. Even Hiroki had thought before that at the end of the game, he might be able to entrust the artificial intelligence Noah's Ark to Seiya, but after hearing what Seiya just said, Hiroki is now a little hesitant. Chapter 325, Jack the Ripper killed the professor? While it's true that Irene is a virtual character in the game, isn't this AI Noah's Ark also merely a virtual life form for humans? Being overly emotional isn't a good thing, but being loyal and righteous can also be a virtue in human nature. Seiya's own abilities are already exceptional, and with the backing of a top jebel like the Suzuki Group, with the added support of this AI Noah's Ark, it's possible he'll rise to the top of the world. But is it really a good thing for Seiya, who stands at the pinnacle, to act with an overly rational approach? Hiroki pondered this. From my perspective, I prefer Seiya's rational approach, but in the eyes of Ego and others, Seiya might be seen as overly rational. After all, the question itself has no answer, just like the famous trolley problem. A Harvard professor once posed a question: imagine there are 5 people on a trolley track, and a child on the other side. You have control of the trolley. Would you save the 5 people or the more vulnerable child? AI had barely finished speaking when Conan frowned and said, our current situation is somewhat different from the trolley problem, isn't it? Even if we protect Irene, we'll definitely be killed by Jack the Ripper, right? AI rolled her eyes at Conan's rebuttal. But protecting Irene would put us at greater risk, right? And Irene is just a virtual character in this game scenario. But if we all lose, all 50 lives in the cocoon will be lost. Seiya, branded cold-blooded, chose the side of reason, while Edogal chose the side of emotion. But to me, the difference is almost irrelevant. After hearing AI's analysis, Conan fell silent, and Hideki Moriboshi on the side looked at Ebura AI with a look of surprise. Originally, he thought that the only ones who could defy the heavens were Seiya and the shrunken Kudo Shinichi, but it turned out that this little girl named Hebura AI was not simple at all. This child named Hebura AI, is she the child of Dr. Agasa? She is so knowledgeable at such a young age. It seems that she will become a great scientist like Dr. Agasa in the future. At this moment, Tomoko Suzuki, who was watching the live broadcast outside, saw Hebura AI supporting her baby son in the game, and her favor for her increased immediately. Towards evening, the performance at the opera house began as usual, and when Irene took the stage, all the forces hidden in the dark had made their preparations. Xiaolin and others hiding behind the curtain stared closely at Irene performing on the stage, guarding against any stranger who tried to approach Irene. Professor Moriarty sat in the VIP seat in the attic, enjoying red wine while waiting for the show to begin with anticipation. If Irene bleeds here, Holmes's expression of pain will definitely be quite interesting. Boom. Just as everyone's attention was riveted on Irene on the stage, a massive explosion echoed, and the surrounding lights suddenly went out. As darkness enveloped them, Ran, Conan, and the others rushed to Irene's location almost simultaneously. It was obvious to anyone that the sudden extinguishing of the surrounding lights was Jack the Ripper's doing. Assassinating Irene in such a public space would undoubtedly be difficult, so they used the explosion to create chaos and then extinguished all the lights, concealing the assassination. Having anticipated this possibility, Conan, Ran, and the others immediately located Irene's location and formed a back-to-back circle, shielding her from behind. The advantage of this approach was that, even in the darkness, no matter which direction Jack the Ripper attacked from, they would be able to spot him immediately. Among the audience, the only one who seemed not surprised but rather delighted, even somewhat excited, by the commotion was Professor Moriarty. After all, if Irene died, he would be able to see the painful expression of his mortal enemy Sherlock Holmes. Even if Irene failed, seeing Jack the Ripper fighting to the death with Seiya and his gang would be a very exciting scene for Professor Moriarty. Professor Moriarty had been rampant in London for so many years, when had he ever been threatened? If Seiya and his gang were killed by Jack the Ripper, he would be very happy to see it. However, just as he stood up and craned his neck to look at the stage, intending to see the interesting scene at the first time, he did not realize that a figure holding a dagger behind him was slowly approaching him. As a first-class killer, Jack the Ripper was very good at hiding his breath. In addition, everyone's attention was now attracted to the stage. No one would have thought that his target was not Irene from the beginning, but Professor Moriarty. Pucci. When the sharp dagger pierced Professor Moriarty's chest, his original excited and happy expression was completely frozen on his face, and gradually turned into confusion and astonishment. Feeling the sharp pain in his chest, Professor Moriarty slowly turned around, and when he saw the familiar face in front of him, now looking at him with a sinister smile, his eyes revealed a deep sense of confusion. "It's you, but why?" His desire to deal with Jack the Ripper was a recent idea that came to him, so there was no way he could be exposed, unless... Impossible. If Seiya and the others were in cahoots with Jack the Ripper, they could have killed him at the club before, without going through so much trouble. So, in other words, Jack the Ripper wanted to kill him, and this was also his idea from the beginning? But why was that? The other party hated the mother who abandoned him, so he had been hunting women, but although Moriarty was a little old, he was a real man. Old man, if you hadn't died, London wouldn't have been in chaos. And only if you're dead could I take over your power and do something for me. Bang! When Professor Moriarty's body, with a dagger stuck in its heart, fell from the VIP seats in the attic, the surrounding guests noticed it and fell into panic. When Conan and the others heard the screams and saw Professor Moriarty lying on the ground with his eyes open, their expressions were instantly shocked. Professor Moriarty, the second most dangerous man in London, was dead, and now the whole city was bound to fall into chaos. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.